Dear viewers, the first chapter of this video was not edited very smoothly. The picture may not match the audio, but most of this video is made with a lot of hard work and it turned out very well. Thanks for watching. Our team would really appreciate it if you put a like and subscribe. Enjoy watching!
A blonde-haired knight fought against a swarthy woman with horns on her head. Her face was covered by a cloak. The young man didn't understand why his enemy's sword didn't split after his hardest blow. He bounced to the side, and at the same time the demon queen asked who made her sword. Both hilt had the mark of a strange blacksmith on it. It was now obvious that not only were their strengths on par, but also the strength of their weapons. The queen said there was no point in fighting any further. It would be a waste of time. They decided to tell everything to the blacksmith and learn about his discontent, to understand to continue the war or to stop it. The knight and the queen said goodbye and went their separate ways. The strange blacksmith worked tirelessly in his forge. His assistant said that there was enough to do for today, and they all went to dinner together. The blacksmith stood in the middle of the clearing and reflected on the fact that it had been a long time since he had been in this world. He had died after being hit by a truck because he wanted to save a cat that was walking along the road. He woke up in an empty space with a mysterious girl. She said he was dead and she was now restraining his body from decomposing, channeling his consciousness and soul back into the dead shell. This was the same cat he had saved. She traveled among the various parallel dimensions and observed the worlds, eliminating what would upset the balance. She watched his world in the form of a cat, and because of her mistake, she almost died. The man himself should not have died at that moment, and so a hole was formed, and to compensate for his death, the girl was going to create a new being. The man asked why couldn't she just make him continue to live after the accident. Catgirl replied that it would indeed be the easiest way. However, the problem was that she had already seen his death. And everything she had seen was recorded and stored in the world, so his death could not be changed. It was a constituent part of the world. In other worlds, his death was not yet recorded, which was why she wanted to move him. The man then asked what she was doing it for. The catgirl replied that she was tormented by her conscience that he died because of her, and also, in gratitude, she wanted to give him some advantage in the new world. She asked what kind of work he would like to live with. The man reflected that he had been single all his life, with no family, and worked as a programmer for a black company. He had lived a boring life without even noticing how gray and old he had gotten. The only one who will remember him is his boss, but he will soon find a replacement. There would be no one to miss him. He replied that he had a favorite hobby, creating things, and he was always attracted to blacksmithing, but he couldn't pursue it. He also really likes cats, so he would like to live a simple life with his cat. Catgirl replied that she would put more physical strength into him and add the rest of her resources in language and magic. A blinding flash formed in space, and the next moment the man was already lying on the grass in the new world. His hair was longer and his body wore the clothes worn by the locals. A pulse went through all his blood vessels, from his fingertips to his brain. It was a stream of information about this world that the man had not known before. When the pulse passed, he realized that he had gained skills and experiences he had not known before. He stood outside his home and was surprised that that enchantress had even prepared a place for him to live. There were supplies in the kitchen that would be enough for him for the first time. But the house had no electricity, plumbing, or even a well in the neighborhood, so he had to find a source of fresh water. He found the workshop, and taking the blacksmith's hammer in his hands, he felt he knew how to use it. It was the knowledge and skills that that sorceress had put into him. She also spoke of giving him some magic. He decided to make dinner, and as he put the chopped vegetables into the pot, he decided to set it on fire with his power. From his fingers, he was able to create a small fire. But with such a tiny flame, he couldn't heat the food or melt the stove. he decided to use it as a lighter. Gathering his hair into a small ponytail, he went into the forest to look for water. He started leaving marks with his knife on the trunks of trees so that he wouldn't get lost. Walking through the forest, he saw a green squirrel. This world was much different from his home world. He took a bite of a wild apple, but it turned out to be too sour. The man was worried that no matter how much he walked, there was no village in the area. With the new information in his head, he was able to identify medicinal herbs. Gathering them, he reached the fresh water river, which happened to be a 15-minute walk from the house. Looking in his reflection, he noticed that he looked much younger. He was about 30 years old by the looks of it. The blacksmith was about to go fishing when suddenly, he saw a girl lying unconscious in the bushes. She had animal ears, claws, and a tiger-like tail. The blacksmith realized that she would not survive if he did not help her. He picked her up and carried her to his house. He sterilized the needles in boiling water and brewed herbs as a painkiller and antiseptic. Then he spread the girl out on the table, stripped her of all her clothes, and tore the sheet into bits. The deepest wound was on her stomach. He tried to stitch up her wound as carefully as possible, but he was a novice, and he was afraid she would be left with a terrible scar. He wrapped a blanket around her and watched over her sleep. The blacksmith didn't want to be a workaholic like in his previous life. He wanted to live a comfortable life, so he decided to start working leisurely from tomorrow. Continuing to sit near the tigress, he fell asleep. When the man woke up, he found that the girl, covering her nakedness with a blanket, had her claws on him with a menacing look. Chapter 2. The tigress plopped the blacksmith on the floor and sat on top of him, cradling his face with her paw. The man asked her if the wound on her stomach hurt. The girl replied that it hurt, but not as much, and then asked in return if he had considered her naked. The blacksmith said he had been forced to undress her to treat and sew up her wounds, but he had not touched any other parts of her body. He swore to that, and then the girl got off him, saying she would trust him, even though she could smell him as a liar. The man said that the tigress' blood was soaked with blood, and so he had to tear it to get it off her body, and held out her long shirt. The tiger girl dressed herself and said she didn't care, they were just simple rags she didn't care to lose. Afterward, the tigress asked the man what he was doing here, and if this was his home. The blacksmith didn't want to lie much, and admitted that he was just about to start his blacksmithing business, and had moved into this house just yesterday. The girl said that she didn't remember there being a house in this part of the Black Forest, though she rarely entered this area and just might have overlooked it. The house was in the east, and the tigress most often wandered north and west. Yesterday, she had wanted to take a break, but she had run into a large black bear and had barely escaped it with her wounds. If the man hadn't saved her, but the bear would most likely have found her and torn her to pieces. The blacksmith was surprised at this information and thought he was very lucky that when he was walking through the forest yesterday, he had not come across this bear himself. He asked the tigress how long it would take her to recover from her wounds. She replied that her beastman abilities were much higher than normal humans, but even she with such a deep wound would need rest. She estimated that she could fully recover in 2 weeks. The blacksmith asked the girl if she would like to stay in his house then. Since she needed to recover, she could stay with him, and since he was just starting his business, he needed an assistant to help with the household. He would provide her with shelter and food for her help. The tigress was surprised, but agreed to the deal. She said that as long as he didn't smell suspicious, she would trust him. The blacksmith asked the girl what her name was, and she said her name was Samia. He said it was a very beautiful name, but the tigress did not like it. Then the blacksmith said that anyway, that was the name her family had given her and it suited her very well. He then introduced himself as Eizo Nuya, which was his name in his past life. Samaya was surprised that Eizo had a last name, and said that mostly nobles, those with status and their own estates, had last names. She then said that by his appearance he was a man of the North, and then didn't ask about the family name, assuming that people of the North all had family names. From this dialogue, Eizo realized that the people of the North were Asians, and said that in that case there was no need to call him by his last name, and it would be sufficient to address him only by his first name. Eizo began work in the forge. He started a fire and heated the coals. This was enough preparation. His first item he wanted to make was a large knife. He heated the coals with fire magic and maintained the temperature with wind magic. Once everything was heated to the right temperature, he began to work on the metal. After melting it into a mold, he began to hammer to compact the dough. As he worked, Eizo realized that he was much stronger than he had been in his previous life, as it had been easy enough for him to draw water and carry Samiya the previous day. But now to work with a heavy hammer and a roaster all day. He polished the blade with a file and sharpened it on the sharpening stone. When the blade was ready, he decided to test its point. Eizo placed a bunch of greens on the wooden board and pressed the knife down. It was so sharp that it not only easily cut through the greens, but even chopped the board it was lying on. Eizo was frightened by such insane sharpness of the knife, which was made thanks to the preferential mode, a gift given to him by the goddess. He decided that such a knife was too dangerous in the kitchen, and it would be much better to use it for self-defense. He decided to use the advantage mode not always, and to create 3 more knives, the quality of which would be higher and lower than the one he had already created. This would be determined by their point, so that some would be safe to use when cooking, and others would help in battle. After a while, he woke the sleeping Samiya and told her that dinner was ready. Samiya said that no matter how much rest she got, she still felt like sleeping all the time. Suddenly, she saw Eizo light a lamp and wondered if he could wield magic. The man replied that he could only do simple spells and handed a plate of stew to the girl. He said that food was just as important to her recovery. They had roast meat and vegetables for dinner. In this world, Eizo still needed money to buy food, firewood, and materials for the forge. The next day, Eizo called Samiya to him and asked her to try out the 4 knives he had made. The first knife was the bluntest. With it, Samiya easily chopped the greens. With the second knife, she was also able to chop the greens, but it was even faster and easier, which the girl did not expect. She shouted to the man that she was amazed at how skillfully this blade could cut, while Eizo nonchalantly appraised each blade from the side. She took the last one and chopped the greens along with the cutting board. Eizo told her to pull the knife out now, and as it slid out of the wood, Samiya cried out in panic, amazed at the sharpness of that blade. The man excitedly asked the girl to put the knife down before she, in shock, accidentally hurt herself. The beast man marveled at the blacksmith's first-class abilities, while Eizo thought about the uses of these knives and how to sell them. Samiya said she was willing to buy the sharpest knife, as it would come in handy when she was hunting. Eizo said that if she wanted it, she could have it for nothing without paying for it. He also offered to make her another knife personalized for her, and the girl lit up with happiness when she heard that. While cleaning the forge, Eizo thought that he could continue to make such knives in the future by lowering the level, and they would be suitable for sale as farm knives. He was going to make some more farming tools and sell them for a living. He had heard that there was a town beyond the forest with a busy market on weekends, and that was where he was going to start his business. Chapter 3. Eizo finished his examination and changed Samiya's bandages, but she was still unable to hunt. Eizo suggested she go with him to the market the next day. The blacksmith had been creating knives all week to sell on the weekend. He was excited to go with Samiya as she told him about the local ecology and surroundings along the forest road. The man was worried that they would meet wolves or boars along the way, but the girl replied that she felt his strength and they would be safe with him, even if he himself did not know his own strength. The road was traveled without incident, and passing the fortress, they found themselves inside the city. There was a marketplace outside the outer walls, and since the city mostly existed through trade, there was no need to pay to enter. Eizo was stopped by a guard and asked him to show his goods before letting him inside. After looking at the knives, the guard let the blacksmith pass and asked him not to cause trouble in the market. 1 silver coin must be paid to enter the market itself, after which the merchant is given a counter and a wooden plaque with permission to trade. The seat is taken by the first person to arrive. But in 2 hours, Eizo and Samaya still hadn't sold anything. No matter how hard the man tried to present his goods, no one would look at his knives. A guard who had skipped by the fortress approached them and decided to buy one of the knives he had seen earlier. He already had a knife, but it wasn't as sharp and he had to constantly sharpen it, so he decided to buy a new one. Eizo asked for 5 silver coins. The knight was very surprised at such a low price. In fact, the man and the tigress had set such prices in order to at least sell something, as they assumed that the sale would be given with difficulty. After the purchase, he told the blacksmith that when he came to the unit for lunch, he would tell his comrades about the knives, and maybe some of the other knights would also want to buy something from him. The blacksmith was very happy that he finally got the first money for the item he made with his own hands. They never bought anything else from them for the next 3 hours. Suddenly, Eizo's counter was surrounded by a whole crowd of guards. He was frightened by their arrival, for he had done nothing offensive. As it turned out, Marius, who had bought a knife from them, showed it to his comrades, and they wanted one just like it. In the end, Eizo sold all his goods and went home with Samia, with a large profit in his pocket. As they returned, the man thought about setting up Samia's own room for a long time. As they were putting the groceries they had bought in the pantry, the girl asked the man if he could make metal arrowheads. The tigress' main weapon was a bow and arrow, and she wanted quality arrows from the blacksmith to hunt with. Eizo replied that he would make arrows for her, and the girl was pleased. The next day he decided to focus on making knives, and once he had the right batch made, he would start on the arrows. He made a mold out of clay, then poured the heated steel into it and waited for it to cool. Afterward, Eizo made a large saw for cutting trees and improved his axe. He went out into the courtyard with Samia and chopped a large tree with one blow, and then he and the girl sawed it into planks so that it would be easier to make wooden arrow shafts. By the end of the day, the first arrow was ready. While Eizo was putting the finishing touches on it, sitting at the table, Samaya asked if she could stay with him longer. Her wounds had already healed, but not having a home of her own, having to constantly wander the forest, she hoped the man would take her into his home for good. Eizo gladly invited her to live together as neighbors and friends. Afterward, he handed her an arrow, which the tigress was absolutely delighted with. Meanwhile, in one of the taverns of the town, a young man was bragging about his newly bought knife to a fellow. He said that when the blacksmith came again, he would buy one from him. A dark-haired girl came up to them and asked to see the knife. Chapter 4. Eizo, handing Samia's lunch, asked her to be more careful when hunting as she had only recently recovered from her wounds, and told her that if she smelled danger she should return home immediately. While her friend was on the hunt, the man continued to restock his goods. He decided to make only knives and long swords. The female forms cooled down, and he began to work with them. They were molds created by dipping the men's molds in clay for parts. He poured molten iron into the mold with sand, and afterward he ground the burrs on the finished blades. Normally, all these steps of weapon creation would be done by different people, but thanks to the priority mode, he was able to do everything himself. Finally, he carved a seal on the hilt of the sword, marking the logo of his forge, in the shape of a cat that Eizo had liked very much in the video game in his past life. He began swinging the sword from side to side, imagining himself a knight, when Samaya caught him. She looked happy, the reason being that she was finally welcomed home by someone. The girl managed to kill the wood deer, pulled out its organs, and soaked it in the lake. The next morning, she would be able to get the carcass out, and they would cut it up for meat. Samaya praised the arrows that penetrated deeply into the killed animal. As they cut the pieces, the man was surprised that they ended up resembling the store-bought fillet he was used to in his past life. Now he realized that in his former world, why the fruit was so sweet and the meat cut into easy-to-eat pieces was a credit to human effort. Placing the pieces strung on sticks by the fire, Eizo asked his friend what she had done with the insides of the deer. The tigress replied that she had left them in the forest for the wolves to eat. Eizo tasted the meat and was delighted, as he hadn't eaten fresh in a long time. His pantry was mostly dried and dried meat. They definitely hung the fresh cuts out to dry as well so they wouldn't go to waste. Samaya wasn't going hunting, so she helped Eizo by grinding burrs off the items. When the new batch was ready, they set off again for the city. At the entrance, they were met, as before, by Marius-san. He noticed the blacksmith swords and said he would come over later to see the assortment. Eizo sat down at the counter and sent Samaya to buy groceries, handing her a list and money. A richly dressed merchant approached him and asked to see the sword. After examining the blade, the man said he would buy 4 pieces at once. He said he was a traveling merchant and wanted to keep one for himself and sell the other 3 elsewhere. Eizo thought this was a great opportunity to spread the word about his forge and gratefully sold the swords. He even thought about saving up some money one day and going on a business trip to other cities with Samaya himself. After the merchant, Marius-san came to Eizo's place along with his companions. The ordinary long sword model was completely sold out. The only one left was the high-end model, which Eizo wasn't going to sell. The blacksmith told Samaya that they could go home now. The girl froze, looking at a dwarf in the crowd. Dwarves were dwarves who practiced blacksmithing. Suddenly, this dwarf started looking at them himself and eventually approached. It was a little swarthy girl. She asked Eizo if the guards had bought his weapons and afterward asked to examine one of his knives. Pulling it out of its leather sheath, the girl examined the blade long enough and carefully. But soon she caught a glimpse of the luxurious sword model, realizing that this piece was much better. Apologizing to the blacksmith, she took this sword in her hands and also began a long, silent consideration. When she returned the sword, she sat down on her knees and with her forehead bowed to the ground, asked Eizo to take her as his apprentice. Chapter 5. Eventually, all 3 of them made their way to the tavern. They were embarrassed that a dwarf, right in the middle of the market, was kneeling in front of them, so they tried to leave as soon as possible. The girl introduced herself by the name of Reich Moritz. But Moritz wasn't her last name. It was the name of the workshop she used to belong to as a working gnome. Dwarves are essentially groups of families that come together to form a workshop. Eizo introduced himself by first name only and introduced the girl to Samaya. The girl was surprised and asked the blacksmith if he came to these parts from the north. The man replied that he had indeed come from there. Due to circumstances, he settled in the Black Forest and worked as a blacksmith. Rika said that now it made sense to her why she had never seen his wares anywhere before coming to this town. Eizo asked Rika why she wanted to be his apprentice. The girl replied that dwarves begin their apprenticeship at a certain age. She, along with her brothers, left the workshop to learn. She visited many places in search of her teacher. Gnomes look for good workshops and join them as apprentices, and then return home to their workshop and share the skills and knowledge they have learned to create new things with modern techniques. Eizo asked if the human blacksmiths and dwarves were afraid of leaking information about their special techniques. Rika replied that people recognize that it is an honor for every workshop to have a dwarf apprentice, so it's fine, and people willingly share their knowledge with them. When she came to this city a few days ago, she found one of the knives made by Eizo, and afterwards she let her brothers go to look for workshops and teachers without her, since she had decided on her choice. So if Eizo didn't accept her, she would have to travel further alone, since her brothers had already left. Eizo was unhappy with her naivety and asked her not to be so careless from now on. Afterward, he said he would take her on as an apprentice, but he had 4 conditions. First, he didn't like that she could sacrifice herself so easily, so she shouldn't behave like that. Second, he didn't have enough space in his house, so they would have to build an extension. Third, based on the previous point, she would have to help him with more than just blacksmithing. And fourth, he asked her to drop the formalities and call him by his first name Eizo. The girl exclaimed that she couldn't fulfill the last condition because he was her teacher and she should respectfully address him by the title Master. Samaya laughed in response, and Eizo looked embarrassed. The trio approached the house, and Rika looked at it with admiring eyes. When they got inside, Eizo asked her if her legs were tired since she was carrying so much luggage. The girl replied that she was very sturdy and it was fine. Afterward, the man thanked Samaya for worrying about them and for leading them on the safest path. They began to eat dinner, and the man warned that until they got to work on the addition, Rika would have to live with Samaya. The girl excitedly said that she couldn't force them to sleep separately and wouldn't take up space on the double bed, but would just lie on the floor. Eizo replied that they had always slept separately. Rika was surprised and said that she thought Eizo and Samaya were married. The tigress jumped up and became indignant to hide her embarrassment that that wasn't the case at all. Eizo replied that there was no such connection between the two so far, at which point Samaya was surprised at his words, so far. Afterward, the man wondered if members of different races could even get married, since Samaya was a beast man. Rika calmly replied that she realized they were just a family living in the same workshop. Eizo began stroking Samaya's head and said that they were indeed a family. After a night's rest, they weeded the ground to make room for an addition to the house and dug holes for posts. Samaya had gone hunting, so Eizo and Ricky were left alone. The girl was used to hard labor, her muscles were strong, and together with the blacksmith she worked at a fast pace. After a while, Samaya came back and said that she had killed a big deer. The girl then noticed that Reik was acting strangely. With some trembling in her body, she was examining the axe. The dwarf girl replied that she was amazed at the sharpness of the axe. She wanted to chop wood, but as soon as she touched the blade to the wood, it slipped through like a knife through butter. It was incredible. Samaya replied that she too was shocked when she first saw the sharpness of Eizo's blades. The man told the apprentice that tomorrow they would do some blacksmithing. They had to join forces to cut up the huge wood deer that Samaya had killed the previous morning. After a short rest, they went to the forge. They had prepared the female form last night, and now Reik was pouring red-hot metal into it. Eizo noticed that the girl already had a lot of experience, and she worked hard without stopping. After making a snack, Eizo decided to show her how he made knives. However, he didn't know how he could teach the girl the privileged skill the goddess had given him. He decided to be honest and admitted that he was completely inept at teaching his craft, so Reik would just have to watch him work, and from his own observations understand what to do and how to do it. Reik asked the teacher not to worry about that. Eizo decided to make a model of the knife for mass production. Soon he handed the finished product to Reik for evaluation. With eyes full of admiration, she said the knife turned out amazing. She could hear the voice of the iron. Not every craftsman can hear the product. It meant it was filled with soul. But afterward, she said she noticed that the man wasn't making it at full strength or with all seriousness. Eizo was surprised and asked Reik how she realized that. She replied that he just didn't look like he would be putting out full force, and besides, the quality still wasn't comparable to the sword he had shown her earlier. Eizo said that this knife was for mass production, and therefore not as skillful as that single sword specimen, and asked Reich to make the exact same knife. Eizo had never seen others at work and marveled at Reich's labor. He looked at her knife afterward and thought it was almost indistinguishable from his own model. Out loud, he said that he felt a slight difference in strength, and yet, this knife could only get better. He praised his apprentice and said that he was sure that pretty soon she would be able to make a high-quality long sword or something else of the same level. They continued working, and Eizo thought about the fact that what he was doing was his body's knowledge, received as a gift from the goddess. While other blacksmiths and dwarves studied and worked hard to gain those skills. He even thought about the fact that he shouldn't be teaching, as Reich would only be able to imitate him. He made another knife of higher quality and gave it to Reich. The girl was amazed, for even the most talented dwarf could not make such a knife, and thanked him for the gift. Samaya went into the forge and said that she had finished processing the meat and hide. She congratulated Reich on her first knife, and together they walked to the fire outside where meat on sticks was already cooking. Reich saw that Eizo was using magic, and the man once again replied that he could only create simple spells. Suddenly, Samia proudly said that Eizo not only used magic, he also had a last name. Reich asked the last name to the teacher, and when she heard it, she said that she was now Reich Danuya. The man asked why, at which point the dwarf replied that since she was now related to his workshop, she was taking her last name from the name of that forge. Eizo said he didn't want to name the forge Tanuya, at which point the girl said she would be Reich Eizo. Samia started complaining that she also wanted to call herself Samia Tanuya or Samia Eizo. The man thought that he himself had offered her to live with him, and since they were one family, he allowed her to carry his name too. After dinner, Eizo wondered what his special skill would bring to this world, since Reich had said that no one had ever created sharp objects like him before. Chapter 6. Thanks to Reich's serious attitude towards work and Samia's willingness to help, Eizo had more time to concentrate on his work at the forge. In their workshop, Eizo's work speed and efficiency improved greatly. About once a week, they went to the market to sell their products. One day, Marius told them that more and more people in town were asking him where they could buy that blacksmith's goods and when he would be coming to the market again. Eizo thanked the knight for the publicity and help. Afterward, the merchant who regularly bought swords from Eizo also said he would stop by later. The common model, sold best, was a standard knife that even housewives willingly bought. It was very sharp to cut food, but not as dangerous and didn't chop wood like other models. The middle-class model was for those who were used to handling blades of a quality a few notches higher than ordinary. Such knives and swords were purchased by knights, guards, hunters, and mercenaries. The last model Eizo did not flaunt. It was a high-quality battle sword, which he was going to give to a worthy man when he was convinced of his merit and right to carry such a sword. He carried it with him into town in case he met such a knight, but he always left it wrapped in cloth and did not show it on the counter. The merchandise was sold quickly today, and the man and his charges went out for a lunch of sandwiches. Eizo said that the people who bought merchandise from them were spreading good word about them. Reich reminded them that they needed to think about restocking there or in coal supplies. Eizo realized that he really didn't have a supplier, and whatever was available in the house was starting to run out. He decided to ask the merchant he was working with if he knew any suppliers of the resources he needed. The merchant was just walking in their direction. Eizo told the man that thanks to his advertising, they were able to sell out very quickly. The man replied that he was happy for them and added that he was being asked to stock more of Eizo's forge. The blacksmith replied that if he had known about this in advance, he would have made more goods before coming here. The merchant appreciated the blacksmith's diligence and said that he was going to open his own store instead of the small store in the market. In this store, he was going to place various goods from the artisans he cooperated with, including Eizo. Eizo agreed, and then the merchant introduced himself by the name of Camillo, and shaking hands with his new companion said he was glad to meet him. Eizo then said that he lived in the Black Forest. The merchant was surprised and told the blacksmith that he could live anywhere, but then realized that since he was a northerner and he was accompanied by a beast man and a dwarf, they would indeed be more at ease in the forest. Eizo said that the timing of the bulk sale would be about once a week, and he would tell in advance if anything changed. Afterwards, he asked for a favor. The thing was that his forge was running out of resources, and he was just on the lookout for someone who could help them with that. Camillo said he could buy and deliver the materials to them with a deduction from the price of the finished goods. Eizo was very happy that he could so easily negotiate a supply of ore and coal. Camillo said he would wait for them next week, and afterwards said goodbye. Eizo, Reich and Samiya arrived a week later at the address Camillo had told them. The store turned out to be a huge 2-story house. Inside indeed turned out to be a wide variety of goods. Eizo's swords and knives hung on the wall on framed supplies, and in the corner was information about his forge. It didn't look like a counter for sale at all, but more like the stuff of a museum exhibit. Camillo greeted his friends and motioned for them to go to the second floor to talk. Eizo listed the items he had brought and asked how much to leave in the store. Camillo replied that he needed everything he had, since these items do sell out quickly and are popular. Eizo was surprised and asked Camillo if he was really that famous a merchant. The man replied that he had many connections, selling things to the general public, travelers, professionals, etc. Eizo thought in his mind that it was like a supermarket from his past life. Camillo asked Eizo to custom make a sword, but the blacksmith refused. He said he needed to know the identity of the person he was to make the sword for, as well as his fighting skills, so he would prefer to choose the warrior he wanted the sword for himself. Camillo offered to test the customer on his skills, then placed the order through his store. Eizo agreed to the offer, but decided that as a test, it would be fine if the customer could make it to his forge in person. His house was located in the forest, and if the customer could walk through the forest path, passing through the obstacles in the form of animals and other dangers, it meant that he was already worthy of something and could possess some weapon skills, and the order could also be placed through Camillo's store. He asked the merchant to refer a potential customer if the man himself deemed worthy or not. Camillo agreed, and Samiya and Reich supported Eizo's decision. Afterward, the blacksmith asked if Camillo had procured the materials needed for the forge. The merchant escorted them to the warehouse, which was as huge as the store. There were considerably more materials than 1 week's supply. Camillo said he could maintain such a stock on a regular basis. Eizo asked how much the merchant was willing to charge, and when he heard, he was shocked. Only a quarter of the wholesale price of the finished product. The blacksmith asked why was it so cheap? After all, they were making a good profit. Camillo replied with a smile that he was already getting a lot from his store. He was willing to take care of those who would bring him even more money in the future, and with whom he was going to build a long partnership. So he wanted to help Eizo as much as possible in the beginning. The blacksmith thanked the merchant and asked if he had thought about how they would get all the materials to the forge. The merchant replied that he hadn't thought about it, but he had an old unneeded cart that he was willing to give away for free. Eizo, Samiya, and Reich transferred the ore and coal into the cart and set off for home. On the way, they thought about the fact that they could have people coming directly to their forge because of the publicity, and it would be good to clear the one path that led to their house. Suddenly, Samiya smelled a wolf and asked everyone to stop to wait for it to pass by. Eizo said that they had started to run into wolves a lot. Samiya replied that they were about to have a brood, so they would soon be able to see them with the little wolf cubs. Reich asked why were the wolves in this forest peaceful and not attacking them. Samiya answered the girl that there were many tree deer and grass rabbits in this forest, so no one had to worry about prey. Everyone was well fed. And because of that, the wolves were not aggressive. Plus, they sensed Eizo's strength and wouldn't approach him. Samaya asked Reich to never go into the forest alone, and if she needed anything, she should always go accompanied by either her or Eizo. Reich said she understood, and afterwards suggested that the local wolves had evolved from the power of the forest. Samaya said they weren't the only ones who were dangerous. The forest was also home to bears. At this memory, she clutched her long-heeled stomach. Eizo noticed this and thought about the fact that that black bear that had injured the girl was still roaming somewhere in the forest and causing her fear and apprehension. The black bear, smelling other people's odors, was slowly approaching the blacksmith's house from the thicket of the forest day after day. Chapter 7. Eizo heard to create new weapons thanks to the materials she had acquired. Reich told her teacher that the new parts turned out better than the previous ones, and was glad that they were able to stock up on more metals to try and experiment on something new. They put the cast iron they had purchased from Camillo into a magical furnace that did not produce slag. This was efficient, because with this they could reuse the metal without harming the furnace itself. Reich was impressed by things she wasn't used to. Eizo was helped by a special regimen for efficiency, and because of this, his business flourished without the need to hire additional staff. After a couple days, Eizo was able to create the item he was working on. Samaya asked the blacksmith to come over to her for a moment. The man was surprised to find that the girls had finished making the roof of the outhouse while he was working in the forge. He thanked the girls for their hard work and apologized for rarely visiting them at the house this week. He thought it was hard for the girls to do the construction, but the girls, glowing with happiness, said that they were very strong and they were only happy to work. Eizo said that he had talked earlier with Camillo about buying extra bedding next week, and now all they had to do was make the doors, beds, and other furniture. Reich was very surprised when she heard that Eizo was going to put a door in every room. It was customary in her family that only the master bedroom of the master of the house and his wife and the guest bedroom had a door. Everyone else slept without doors. Samai had nothing to compare it to, as she had spent her entire life in the open-air forest. Eizo stubbornly stated that in his house each family member would have their own room with a door, and that was out of the question. Samaya asked the man if he was going to go into town this week. Eizo replied that he was going to stay home, and afterward he decided to give them all a day off. He had worked hard every day since he had come to this world, but now he had a lot of finished goods and trade established, and he decided they all deserved a day off. The next day, the whole family decided to fish by the river and have a picnic, just as Eizo had wanted since the first day he arrived in these parts. They got out their fishing rods and hooks, and gathered worms and bugs hiding under rocks. Eizo thought Samaya and Reich would be scared of the worms, but they were not intimidated by such things, and they picked them up with interest. They then launched the bait into the water and waited in silence for the catch. Samaya and Reich were catching fish with ease, but Eizo was having no luck. The girls laughed and said that maybe he had too much bloodlust in him and the fish, sensing it, wouldn't swim to his hook. They took a break for lunch, after which the girls fell asleep. Upon waking up, they continued fishing. In the end, each of the girls caught 3 fish. That's one for each family member for 2 meals. Eizo, still fiercely hungry for a catch with a menacing look, didn't want to be so embarrassed in his girlfriend's eyes and wished to catch at least 1 fish. Suddenly, his hook began to twitch. Eizo pulled the rods and caught 1 fish. The girls praised the head of the family, barely containing their laughter at his proud appearance. The fishing was not very fruitful, but they had a rest. Back home, Eizo decided that from the next day he would continue working and building the house. Chapter 8. The building was finished, and the whole family celebrated the event at a festive table. They made beds, bought linens, built shelves and shelves out of boards, and filled them with various household utensils. Now it was truly a family home. Eizo went back to his bedroom, and they converted the study into a guest room. Not far from the house, they began to clear the land to plant with the seeds they had bought from Camillo. The shovels and hoes Eizo had created early in his career finally came in handy in his own home. He wanted to live completely on his own. Samiya caught deer and hares, they gathered nuts and berries, but vegetables and grain still had to be bought in town, which was why the man dreamed of making his own vegetable garden. The next night he finally lay in his bed, which Samiya had occupied before, with Reich sleeping next to him on the hammock. Before that, as in his past office life, he used to sleep at his desk. Apparently, he would never get rid of the habit of a workaholic. The next morning, a girl came to their house in battle clothes, with a scar on her face. Her name was Helen. She was a mercenary, and had decided to order new blades from Eizo, as the previous ones had fallen into disrepair. Once inside, the girl said it was hard to find the place. She avoided the beasts in the forest, even saw a bear in the distance, and walked towards the smoke coming from their chimney. Samiya tensed at the mention of the bear. Helena said she could have killed it, but her current swords wouldn't be up to such a task. Eizo examined Helena's current weapons. They were two short swords, very high quality, but they already had a lot of scars on them, and it was difficult to sharpen them again. Eizo decided to make exactly the same ones, but first he needed to see Helena in battle to see how she worked with such weapons. They went out into the courtyard. Helena showed a few moves on the tree, but it wasn't enough. Eizo wanted to nominate Samiya, since the Kona was an experienced archer and a strong beastman, but she refused and said that Eizo was much stronger than her, even though she didn't see her own potential. The blacksmith agreed to a practice fight and stepped forward with sword in hand, hoping his body itself knew what to do. Helena was incredibly fast, and Eizo barely had time to dodge her attacks. He endured 15 minutes of fighting until he was completely exhausted. Helena said with a laugh that she only wanted to show a couple moves, but got carried away. She was a famous warrior. She was even nicknamed Lightning Sword for being so fast. Eizo told the girl that she could come back for the finished swords in 3 days. Helena wanted to continue the fight, but the blacksmith said that he would then take much longer to make the blades. The girl then, with a cheerful and energetic look, said she would like to see him make the swords. Eventually, Eizo accepted her to live for all 3 days in the guest room. With a cocky laugh, Helena thanked the man, clapping him hard on the back. That was how Eizo received his first customer. After his meeting with Helen, Eizo decided to finish the rest of his work as soon as possible. Samiya, in turn, was persistently helping him. Eizo noticed that Samiya was getting better and better at helping him with his blacksmithing. On days when he's not hunting, she helps him in the workshop. Her work is mostly casting and removing burrs. Samiya seems to enjoy it, and Eizo is even considering letting her work with a hammer someday. Eizo calls everyone over for dinner. Over the meal, Helen tells everyone that she was surprised to see a large deer on her way in. Samiya replies that tree deer really are a pain in the ass sometimes. Helen also mentions that she saw a bear in the distance. Eizo and Samiya were shocked to hear this, and Samiya's wound makes itself known. Helen asked why Samiya and Eizo were suddenly so thoughtful, and Eizo told her the story of how Samiya almost lost her life to a bear. Helen is sorry and talks about how she could have defeated that bear if her weapons had been in perfect condition. Eizo warns her not to do anything rash, because even for Samiya, a beast man, this forest can be very dangerous. If something happens, it is unlikely that they will be able to find Helen. Eizo is very excited about his first order in his workshop. He wants to put his heart and soul into it. Helen, meanwhile, is going to go exploring the next day. She takes Samiya for a walk in the woods and teaches her how to hunt. Imagining Helen handling the blades, Eizo heats the iron and passes the hammer evenly over the entire surface of the piece, smoothing it out. He is careful to ensure that the material has optimal strength. With his God-given eyes, he can see something like grain in the structure of the iron. He then upholsters the piece to shape it to ensure uniformity and precision. Next, Eizo asks Reich to bring him a short sword of a common model, so he can test the strength. He inserts the short sword into the log and strikes it with all his might with the manufactured sword. There is not a scratch on the sword. Eizo realizes that the durability is fine, but unfortunately he will no longer be able to sell such a weapon. Reich wonders why resharpening is not enough to bring the sword back to its original appearance. He explains that he doesn't want to sell something he's already used for such experiments, and the quality of the item might suffer. Eizo says he would rather retreat it and use it at home. Reich states that Eizo is very stubborn, and he couldn't agree more. Reich reflects that Eizo is a very stubborn and honest craftsman. And Eizo, for his part, thinks that even though he's been given incredible power, he works with care and attention. He realizes that he's at least gotten a little closer to what he wanted to do in the past, and he's very happy about that. Eizo forges another sword and puts his mark on it. Reich asks permission to see the finished product, and Eizo allows her to do so. Reich looks at every detail of the sword and states that this piece is unlike anything that can be made with talent alone. Reich touches on Eizo's past and says that Eizo leaving the north is a huge loss to that part of the region. Eizo realizes that she's right. His level is not a simple talent. Eizo realizes that sometimes he uses his power to its fullest with a purpose. This time, he made the steel stronger so it couldn't chop the rock in half. But if sharpness was the priority, he could probably make such a product. He realizes that for a weapon, it's extraordinary strength. Eizo also thinks about the fact that he could make weapons out of more than just ordinary steel. Eizo realizes that he could create a weapon that combines both strength and sharpness. But if he's not careful, it could affect the fate of its owner and bring more threat than good. Eizo is not ready to bear such a burden if the weapon ends up in the wrong hands. Reich asks if she's upset Eizo in any way, but he replies that he's just thinking about it. No need to be upset about something that didn't happen. Eizo suggests that Reich call it a day. He's very happy that she can be his apprentice. If he can create something that people think is truly worthwhile, then all is well. At the same moment, Helen and Samiya return from their hunt. They brought back a lot of things. For example, herbs for treating festering pus, some sour, some sweet. Samiya suddenly tells Eizo that the wolves were making very unusual sounds today. She's sure that Helen saw a large black bear at the time. Regardless, Eizo suggests dinner, and Samiya agrees. Eizo thinks that he doesn't want to put Samiya and Rika in danger because of the bear, and he should be more careful himself. It's the second day of work on the order. Today, Helen is watching Eizo's process. She is surprised that all his actions look very easy. Reich claims it's all due to the master's incredible speed. Helen asks Reich if she can do the same, to which Reich replies that she doesn't know if she could catch up to Eizo even if she practiced all her life. Eizo is pleased to hear this, but realizes that it's just a gift from the goddess and not a talent worth praising. Finally, the 2 pieces for Helen are ready. Helen wants to test the new weapon right away, but Eizo says that today is too late and suggests doing it tomorrow. He apologizes for making her wait, but it's really better this way. Eizo shows the girls his new dishes. Samaya says it's beautiful, to which Eizo tells her not to exaggerate. Helen, upon seeing the raspberry dish, talks about how she didn't know it could be used like that. Reich is very surprised by the holiday dinner and says that even her parents never do that. Eizo claims it's all because he fulfilled his first order and needs to celebrate. The girls congratulate Eizo and celebrate all together. Eizo praises Rika and says that she helped him a lot with his work. Helen slaps Eizo on the back with all her might, congratulating him on his first order, to which he replies that she is the one who made the order, so she should be thanked too. The next day, Helen is already testing out the new sword. She talks about how great it feels in her hand. She was so excited about it that she couldn't sleep last night. Helen shows incredible speed and mastery of the weapon. She is very enthusiastic and excited. Helen says it's amazing. With a sprint, she pounces on Eizo and hugs him. Helen says she is very glad she asked him to do this. Screenshot 29. Eizo says he's very happy about it too. He has tested the product for durability, but if anything happens, he will fix it. Helen will just need to stop by Camillo's or Eizo's workshop. Helen broaches the subject of payment, and Eizo says she can pay as much as she sees fit. Helen talks about how she doesn't know anything about market prices. Eizo is fine with whatever amount she's willing to spend on this order. She holds out 2 gold pieces and 1 silver piece to him, and Eizo accepts them. Helen asks again if this is definitely a good price for these swords. She paid a little more than she did for the last ones. Eizo says that the original swords were just as good, so he doesn't mind that at all. They shake hands. Reich, Samaya, and Eizo say goodbye to Helen. Eizo says that was one hell of a grip in her hug. Samaya replies that she and Reich used all their strength to save Eizo from her embrace. Eizo and the girls return home, and Eizo assumes things are back to normal. But 2 days later, this happened, encountering a natural threat. Chapter 10. A frightened Samaya comes running in from the forest, and Eizo asks her why she came back so quickly. Samaya talks about the black bear that showed up in the forest. Eizo asks if Samaya is hurt, to which she replies that she managed to run away as soon as she saw him. Samaya also suggests that the bear has a good sense of smell and could have followed her home. Eizo ponders what to do about it. Eizo suggests that the bear got pretty close, and they might also run into it on their way to town. So what happens if Samaya or Reich is attacked by a bear? Eizo talks about stepping back for a while. Eizo takes the spear he made and says he'll eliminate the bear if it's still there. Until he returns, the girls will have to lock all the doors in the workshop and house. Samaya offers to go along with Eizo and help him, but he refuses, reasoning that he's not sure if he can stand up for her if anything happens. Eizo says he knows a little about hunting. He doesn't underestimate Samaya's skills as an archer, but thinks the girls should let him figure it out on his own. After the fight with Helen, he realized that his body can move on its own. Even though Eizo avoided fighting the bear, he decides that he is still capable of doing it. Samaya tells Eizo to be sure to come back. The girls beg him to come back, to which Eizo replies that he is not going to leave his family to die. The girls understandably let him go, and Eizo goes off into the forest. Eizo goes where he usually felt danger before. All the time he left the search for danger to Samaya, But if that danger is the level of a huge black bear, even his cheater sense starts to crackle. Smell and sound are lost in the rain. So rain is a great chance for Eizo to win because it makes it harder for the bear to find him. Eizo remembers that in the previous world he gave his life to save a stray cat. Now he tries to fence his current family out of danger by sacrificing his new life. Though his body has been reborn, the soul that gave its life for the cat remains the same. Now Eizo has something to protect. In his previous life, Eizo was lonely, working for a black company with nothing. Now he has a real family and acquaintances who appreciate what Eizo does with his hands. Eizo stumbles upon a bear and begins to fight it. During the fight, Eizo thinks about the fact that even with his size, the bear is very fast. If it even touches Eizo, he will be killed immediately. Eizo fights hard against the bear. To protect his new world, the everyday life he has worked so hard to build. Eizo swings and makes a final strike, which kills the bear. The bear doesn't move or breathe, which means it's really dead. Eizo reflects on the fact that Samaya might have been right about the spear being too sharp and uncomfortable. Eizo reflects on the first time he took someone's life. He's so nervous he's shaking. Even with his priority mode, it was quite difficult to defeat such a bear. He has a lot of bruises and abrasions, but his bones are fine. Next, he ponders what to do with the bear. He thinks of eating it and burying it. We should take it home, but Eizo isn't sure if he can handle that. Eizo finds it very difficult to carry the dead bear even with his strength and muscles, because the bear is really heavy. The rain subsides little by little, and Eizo hopes that he will get home before the wolves or anyone else attacks him. But he's only barely halfway there. Abruptly, Samaya jumps out of the bushes at Eizo with the bear, mistakenly believing that the bear has attacked Eizo. Eizo assures her that he is actually dead and there is nothing to fear. Samaya asks if Eizo is okay, and he replies that after the battle, his whole body hurts in different places, but his bones are fine, so there are no fractures. And that's when Samaya cries. Samaya pounces on Eizo and hugs him while crying. She is incredibly happy that Eizo defeated the bear without any major injuries. She also hopes that she didn't get in his way. Reich appeared on the horizon. She revealed that Samaya was talking about Eizo being delayed, whereupon Samaya rushed towards Eizo. Reich couldn't stop her and went along with her. Eizo and the bear's smells mixed. They thought the worst could have happened, so the girls ambushed them. Eizo said it was dangerous, to which Reich replied that she couldn't send Samia alone. Reich said that Eizo and the bear looked like one, and the next thing that happened was what happened. Eizo thanked her, to which Reich replied that Samaya was the one to thank. Samaya clutched at the master with all her might, and the master thanked her. Eizo then suggested that they all go home together. Eizo managed to calm Samaya down, and they carried the bear home together. On the way, they lowered it into the lake and decided to come back for it the next day. Eizo was so tired that he was already falling over when they got home, so Reich volunteered to cook dinner herself. Eizo decided to rest in his room. Samaya asked Master if he was okay, to which he said to call him when the bathroom was ready. But Eizo didn't wait and fell asleep as he was too tired. Eizo accidentally fell asleep on Samaya. Eizo wakes up and realizes that he fell asleep without visiting the bathroom. He discovers that he woke up with his clothes on, even though he fell asleep without them. He next greets Samaya and tells her that he accidentally fell asleep. Samia says that Reich told her that if he wasn't wiped, bad air would get into his body, so she and Reich did it together and put him to bed. Reich walked into the room and said hello to Master. Eizo apologized to the girls for having to mess around with him. Reich tried to say something, but Samaya prevented her from doing so. Eizo said it was fine. The girls called Eizo over, saying that they had already made breakfast. Another new day in Eizo's new life began. They had roasted bear meat for breakfast. Suddenly, Eizo realized that there was no bathroom in their house. Samaya and Reich boiled water and rubbed themselves and washed their hair in a bucket. Eizo jumped into the lake during his daily water intake, and it's very refreshing. Eizo hasn't heard any complaints from Reich and Samaya, but he's a little worried nonetheless. Samaya comes home from hunting and looks very dirty. She's gotten very dirty. Eizo tells her that she's covered in dirt and there's no way to clean it up with a rag. It's a bit of a hassle, but she should have gone swimming in the lake like Eizo said. Samaya really doesn't want to go and says she'll wipe herself when she's dry. Eizo replies that then the bedding will get dirty. He also tells her that she has dirt even in her hair. Reich says that if Samaya is going to go swimming, she will join too. Reich says that she hasn't gone out in a while, as it will be quite dangerous to walk alone. But going with Samaya should be nice and safe. The girls head out on the road, and Eizo wishes them luck. Screenshot 68. Reich asks Samaya why she hates water. Samaya replies that she just doesn't like it. She often goes into the water to submerge her catch, but never dives in head first. She is not used to washing herself completely. Reich asks why her hair and fur are so beautiful then. Samaya replies that she grooms them carefully and wipes her body. Reich marvels that even though Samaya has so little maintenance, she still always looks flawless. It's hot and sweaty in the workshop, so Reich decides to take a dip every now and then. But she can't get there by herself, so she takes Samaya with her. Samaya says that if Reich wants to go here, she can call Samaya at any time and she will escort her to the lake. Reich offers Samaya her help in washing her hair. She's been looking after her younger brothers, so she doesn't have to worry about that. Samaya says she doesn't remember much about her childhood anymore, but it reminds her of an old feeling she had when she was a child. Next, the girls return home, where they are greeted by Eizo. Eizo asks if they are cold, to which they reply that they have already warmed themselves by the fire. At that point, Eizo has already prepared dinner. Samaya tries to get the spoon right, but there is no way she can do it. Samaya says that Eizo holds it in a different way, and she finds it very beautiful. Since Samaya is now living with their family, she thought it was cool and she would like to emulate them, but it is very difficult for her. Reich offers his help and says he will teach her how to hold a spoon. They will practice together. Reich explains that first you have to open your hand and clasp the spoon between your thumb and forefinger. Reich has a big family, so she's good at teaching. Eizo didn't even notice the fact that Reich can teach him and Samaya a lot. Eizo serves soup on the table. Screenshot 75. Samaya finally manages to get the spoon right and tastes the soup Eizo made. She is very happy and says that today's soup is much tastier than ever. Eizo claims that it's business as usual, but it's true that when one is happy, food seems to taste better. As they eat lunch together, Rika and Eizo also think the soup tastes better than usual. Gradually, the three of them become a real family. Chapter 11. The girl tells her brother about hiding in the Black Forest. The blacksmith Eizo lives there. Her brother replies to her that he wrote a letter to a merchant who knows his whereabouts, so the girl should take the letter and visit him, because he will be able to help her. Eizo and Camillo are sitting in his store discussing trading. Camillo talks about how Eizo's goods will find a good customer. Suddenly, Eizo starts talking about Marius. He has heard that he has long since returned to the capital. He asks Camillo if he knows anything about it. Camillo wonders why he needs such information. Eizo replies that he would like to thank him for helping him in his endeavors, but he hasn't seen him lately, so he was wondering what happened to him. Camillo replies that he heard that something fishy is going on in the capital right now. He thinks that Marius' disappearance might have something to do with it. Camillo also adds that it's best not to know too much about such things for your own good. Eizo thanks him. Eizo, Reich, and Samaya sees a girl in the distance running away from her pursuers. She screams that she might be caught before she reaches the city. Samaya and Eizo speculate on who these people might be. Samaya decided to check out who it could be. She said that if someone was attacked by bandits, it doesn't matter, they should just go and help them. Eizo yells that they will catch up with her soon, she should go back if she is in danger. Samaya stands up for the girl. Eizo runs out, leaving things behind for Rika. He takes out his sword and asks people what's going on here. Eizo fights with the bandits. Eizo has killed everyone and there is no one else left. He approaches the girl and asks if she is hurt. She replies that she is fine. Eizo asks her if she can tell him who she is and why she was attacked. Obviously she has her reasons, but the guys will need to explain themselves to the guards somehow, so they need to know why they killed so many people. Her face looks familiar to Eizo. The girl thanks them for their help and introduces herself. Her name is Diana Imore. She says that she lives in the capital city, but for some reason she needs to move in with a certain person for a while. She explains that she didn't make it to her destination in time because she was attacked by stalkers, and she doesn't know what would have happened to her if they hadn't shown up and rescued her. Eizo wondered about her last name. He wondered if it belonged to a personal aristocracy or if it was related to the events that Camilla was talking about. Eizo wonders what they should do with her now. Eizo says that the guards will get there sooner or later. He suggests that they either inform them of what happened or run away, and the girl suggests that they run after all. She is confident in her actions, because by doing so she can buy time until she gets to her destination. Eizo asks where she will go, and the girl says she will go to that person. Eizo reflects on the fact that he and Diana are now in the same boat. He tells Rika to pull the cart, and he also asks Samaya for help. This was the first time Eizo used his weapon for its intended purpose. He doesn't know if it was the fault of that girl or those people, but he was determined to protect his family. So he feels no guilt or regret for what he did. Samaya asks him if he's hurt, to which Eizo replies that he's fine. Eizo asks Diana about the man she is heading to, because maybe he can help her find him. Diana replies that her older brother told her that the man lives in the middle of nowhere, and it looks like he settled here recently. Also, that man is a skilled blacksmith. Diana's brother says that his sword and knife were made by him, and that he would like to repair them when everything is settled. It's no surprise to Eizo now that Diana's face looks very familiar. He asks if by any chance Diana's brother's name is Marius. Eizo says that he used to work as a guard in the town down the road. Diana confirms this and says that Marius Allhardheimer is her brother. She also asks how Eizo knows her brother. Eizo compares a picture in his head about the very person the girl is going to. Eizo says that it looks like the person she's heading to is him. And it's not something that can be easily believed. Diana had a letter from Marius to Camillo. She was supposed to meet the only person who knows where Eizo really lives and ask him to bring him to me. Marius wants to give his sister to an eccentric old man who lives in the Black Forest, a dangerous and not hospitable place. Eizo assumes that something is wrong with Marius. Diana asks people to introduce themselves. Reik, Samaya, and Eizo take turns saying their names. Eizo talks about how they've already bought some time, but if they stay there, the guards will catch up with them quickly. The guys arrive at Eizo's house. He suggests they sort out their luggage first, and then start cooking. Thanks to Samaya's vigilance, they didn't have to worry about being chased. Eizo shows her the living room, which is probably too small for an aristocrat, but Diana takes it calmly. Next, Eizo prepared dinner and invited Diana to the table. Diana really enjoyed the food and shrieked with pleasure. Diana apologizes for her behavior, as she is just very hungry since she hasn't eaten since morning. Reik replies that there's no need to apologize, and she's glad she enjoyed the food. Eizo says that it's important to be able to enjoy good food, because with good food you can get through the most difficult times. Diana thanks them for taking her in, even though it was unexpected for her. Eizo thinks about the fact that her life was threatened and now she has to spend the night in someone else's house, but if she can enjoy a good meal, then everything is okay. Eizo asks Diana about the reason why she left town. He wasn't sure if he should ask her for details, but since she's going to be staying with them indefinitely, he'd like her to share some information so they can hide her properly. Diana begins the story of her Imor family. Chapter 12. Diana begins with Count Imor. All of her family members rule the territory, including Camillo. Leon is the eldest heir and Karel is the second brother. In total, there are 4 children in the family, including Marius and Diana herself. The inheritance was supposed to go to the eldest brother Leon, but about a month ago the situation in their family changed. Count Imor and his heir Leon set out to defeat a horde of demons that had appeared on the border. They failed to do so, and died on the battlefield along with the private army. Marius returned to the capital after the bad news. During the investigation of the case, one suspicious thing was discovered. People said that they were attacked by a powerful monster, but there are no signs on Leon and the Count's bodies that the monster actually did it. The wounds her father and brother received were not from claws or fangs, they were cuts. Diana wondered who benefited from the deaths of her father and brother if the incident was faked. Suspicion falls on Carol's other brother. But Karel is the son of a concubine, and the inheritance of the family throne belongs to his brother Marius, the son of his father's real wife. Carol's mother died shortly after his birth, and Marius' mother took pity on him, so he was raised equally with the other siblings. Diana says she didn't even know about it before the incident. Eizo says that if the inheritance issue isn't resolved soon, the Earl's absence could result in his title being stripped from him, so time is running out. Eizo speculates that the one targeting Diana is her own brother Marius. Eizo thought he was just an ordinary soldier, but it turned out to be much more complicated than that. Now that Eizo has seen Marius' letter to Camillo, he is convinced that Diana is better off staying with them for a while. Eizo says to go to Rika or Samia if Diana has any questions. Diana says she would be happy to work with them. Eizo replies that he doesn't want to be too formal, so they should have communicated more casually because it would make things easier. Diana did just as Eizo said and the next day came. The guys have a slightly different daily routine, and now it's time to get back to work. Diana started working in the workshop, and Samaya started to help her because she remembers how Eizo taught her. Eizo says she's pretty strong despite her noble background. Yesterday, Reich saw Diana wielding a sword. She thinks she's a pretty skilled girl. They finish their work for the day and Eizo congratulates her on finishing her first day of work. Next, Diana sees the swords and says that they are of different quality. Eizo confirms her guess and says that the long sword is the standard model and the short sword is the luxury model. Diana asks Eizo for permission to look at it. He doesn't mind, but says the hilt isn't finished yet. Diana examines the sword closely. She talks about how incredible it is. Reich recalls that she was also very surprised when she saw it for the first time. There are only a few blacksmiths in the capital that can do this kind of work. The high-end models and below are nothing out of the ordinary, meaning that by selling high-end swords, Eizo will just be a good blacksmith and won't stand out much. Diana asks Eizo if he can do sword training with her, and Eizo cringes as he recalls his fight with Helen. Diana says she doesn't think she can beat Eizo, but says she wants to see again the moment he saved her. Eizo says it's going to get dark soon, so they can only do it once. He also feels like Diana is different from the average girl. Diana looks very happy. Eizo didn't go for the higher quality swords for safety's sake. The girls say that people usually don't realize how powerful blacksmiths are, and Eizo is much stronger than he seems. Eizo tells Diana to attack when she is ready. Diana attacks Eizo at an unexpected moment. One move after another, Each move of hers is very precise and agile. Eizo becomes more serious and ponders that she's not as good as Helen, but she's much better than the average swordsman. Eizo defeats Diana in battle. Eizo says he's not used to this kind of physical activity. Diana asks if he really wasn't fighting at full strength, and Eizo confirms that he was, because they weren't fighting to the death. Diana is upset that she still couldn't compete, but Eizo cheers her up, saying she's still doing pretty good. Diana says she's called the Rose of the Arena, but Eizo says she's only not doing badly. Samaya says that even she, a beast man, if she did it 100 times, she would still never be able to beat Eizo once. Reich tells Diana not to be discouraged, because their master is so strong that he fought Helen and didn't get hurt. Eizo reflects on the fact that Helen didn't hold back when she fought him, that the priority mode should be minimum for self-defense. Diana recalls that Helen is a lightning sword, and Eizo says that he stood against her for about 15 minutes, to which Diana was very surprised. Diana recalls that Helen's nickname was given to her because of her speed with the sword. This is what made her famous, and she is well known among the nobility. Diana reflects on the fact that Eizo not only forged swords for her, but also stood with her in battle. Eizo suggests that everyone go home now that they're done. Diana falls to her knees and asks Eizo to teach her the art of battle. Eizo is shocked at this offer, but tells Diana that if she is willing to practice one time after work, he can do it. Eizo says that he hasn't studied sword fighting properly, and he's also not very good at teaching, so Diana will have to watch and learn by doing. Eizo reflects on the fact that Diana was a tomboy at home. He also tells Diana not to be afraid of him and not to call him master. Eizo got a second apprentice that day, albeit not in blacksmithing. One more thing added to his daily routine. Diana continued to help with the work in the workshop from the next day, and in the evenings, as Eizo promised, they fight on the wooden swords they made especially for training. Diana is well trained in the art of sword fighting. She is very sharp. Eizo thinks the best thing he can do for Diana is to help her improve herself through this kind of competition with him. Like teaching Rika blacksmithing, it's just a way for them to use Eizo, since he can't teach them anything himself. This way the girls can build on their own foundation and move forward. Eizo is sure he can be of use to them. Screenshot 136. Diana runs away from Samia holding a bow. The girls return to the house and Eizo asks them what happened. Samaya says she asked Diana to be a corraller. She was supposed to track the prey and drive it to the archer. Diana says she is very tired. Diana says this is very different from hunting in the capital. Thanks to Samaya, she killed a huge deer. Eizo thinks that Diana had to run a lot, so there will be no training today. She needs to rest. Diana agrees with his decision. Eizo suggests that they deal with the deer they killed on the hunt tomorrow. Diana says she is looking forward to it. The next day, they begin cutting up the meat. Diana watches the process carefully. Eizo thinks she is unfazed, even though she is a young lady. Eizo reflects on life, and Samaya says he looks like her grandfather. Reich asks if it's the northern way of thinking that affects his speech so much. Reich says she was taught at home that everything has a soul. Diana asks if the forest has a soul. Eizo says that everything has a soul. Grass, water, wind, earth, sun, fire they use. In order to live with them, you have to be grateful, as Eizo's grandfather said. So when they eat, they put their hands together in gratitude for the life and bounty of nature, and further they say, Itadakimasu. Diana says it's like a prayer. Samaya suggests doing it the same way at Eizo's house. She says he already does it from time to time. Eizo suggests that the others try doing it as well, and next he calls them home to make dinner. When everyone is gathered around the table, Eizo teaches the girls how to fold their hands and say, Itadakimasu. Marius sits in the Imura house and reflects on the fact that after burying his father and brother, Karel should have been the head of the family. Carell did not become the heir and was very angry about it. It was the first time Marius had seen him like that back then. Shortly after leaving home, Carell spoke out against the succession. Then terrible things began to happen for Marius. False documents that undermined his reputation, constant assassination attempts. Marius wasn't too inconvenienced by this. He had always proved his innocence with ease and could stand up for himself. But now Carell has dragged Diana into this, and Marius can no longer allow him to continue his rampage, especially after the recent incident. Marius needs to rely on Eizo to end this conflict. He wonders if he can handle it. A few days have passed since Diana's arrival. Eizo went to town to sell his wares. He also gave the letter to Camel and explained the situation to him. He then decided what to do next. As it turned out, Camillo already knew what was going on and hoped he wouldn't have to involve Eizo. But he already trusted him with Diana, so he's involved one way or another. Eizo once again says that he's in Marius' debt. If he needs a good blacksmith, he'll do whatever he can to help him. So, he and Camillo find a secluded spot in the woods to exchange letters. A few days later, Eizo contacted Camillo. Eizo's letter told him to gather all the things he needed for work, as they would be traveling to the capital. He decided to leave the girls at home, entrusting the forge to Rika and the hunting to Samia. Eizo realized that he had a family he could rely on. Diana apologizes once again for getting him into this. Eizo says that he owes her brother a debt, so she can consider that she has come to repay that debt. Eizo sees the wagon with Camillo, and he tells him to get in the back. Eizo has to climb into the crate to avoid being seen. He hesitates to get in, but then realizes it's an old trick of the merchants, because the crate is built into the wagon, and there's actually more room than it looks. While Eizo was asleep, they almost reached the capital, as it was getting quite noisy outside. As it turned out, they were passing through a checkpoint into the capital. Camillo said he was a merchant who brought goods to sell. A soldier at the entrance inspects Camillo's wagon, but doesn't bump into Eizo and lets them pass. They are already far away from the checkpoint. Eizo's whole body is very stiff. Camillo says that Eizo can get out. They reached a place that looks like a blacksmith shop. It's the Imor family's private blacksmith shop. And then Marius enters the room. He says that they forge and repair soldiers' weapons in this forge. Marius and Eizo haven't seen each other in a while, but they don't have much time, so Marius wants to tell everything quickly. Marius wants Eizo to forge him the best sword, as good as he can. Eizo agrees, but asks what he needs the sword for. Marius said that the Imor family has the sword, a family heirloom, but it was stolen a few days ago. Taking into account what is going on in the Imor family, Marius assumes that the sword was stolen by his brother Carell. And he will probably try to claim that the one who allowed the family heirloom to be stolen is not worthy to be the head of the family. Marius believes that Carell is only pretending to gather information and look for the sword. When the time comes, he can retrieve it and say that he found it himself, and that way, he can prove that he is worthy to be the heir to the family. Eizo thinks Carell has such an obvious plan that it's already been revealed. Marius says they don't have time to look for the sword, so they'll pretend that the stolen sword is actually a fake. Marius wants Eizo to forge the Imor family sword, which means his sword will become a family heirloom. Marius says that even though this sword is a relic, it wasn't forged by elves or gods, it's just an ordinary steel sword. When their family was recognized by the king, he simply bestowed it upon them. It is said that that sword was forged by the best blacksmith of the time. Camillo said that Helen showed him the swords that Eizo forged, and he doesn't think there are any other blacksmiths in their world who could forge something like that. Camillo is confident that Eizo can do it. Eizo says that he's never seen their sword, and if he takes on forging it, the sword won't look like a real one at all. Maruis tells him not to worry, because they use the sword rarely, only in private ceremonies, and there is no mention of its appearance in the ancient archives. Eizo agrees and accepts the order. Eizo asks Marius to speak to him more informally, like when they first met in the city, but Marius replies that he can't help but show respect to someone who saves his family. Eizo says that Marius is the only reason he can do business in the city, so he's just returning the favor. Marius then suggests that they both not be overly polite to each other, and Eizo agrees to his suggestion. Marius says that Karel can try to expose their lies, but all they'll have to do is compare the fake sword to the original one. If Eizo's sword turns out to be stronger, it will be immediately clear which sword was granted by the king and which was not. Marius also said that they don't have much time, so the work needs to start now. Eizo begins to repay his debt to Marius. The Eimer family's forge doesn't use magic, so he'll have to start the fire on his own. He's lucky that due to his knowledge, because of his ability, he knows the basics, so he can handle it without a problem. First, you have to choose a piece of iron and forge it on the anvil. After a few dozen blows, the iron will be red hot. Then Eizo will put it in the barley and the bark and set it on fire. Next, it should be put on the coals in the furnace. The mechs in that forge need to be used manually too, so he'll use them to start the flames. Eizo is doing well, even though he usually used magic for forging, which made his job a lot easier. He picked the best piece of iron he had and set to work. Something goes wrong for Eizo, and he thinks he's just working with the wrong hammer and should have gotten his own. He further realizes that this is a custom job, and he needs to concentrate better on the job at hand. After increasing his concentration, he's managed to shape the sword. Now it's time to move on to tempering. Finally, after polishing and sharpening, the sword is ready. But something is wrong with this sword. It's very different from the ones before. Meanwhile, in the workshop, the girls are waiting for the master to return. Mike tells Samaya that she doesn't need to worry about him. Eizo is probably safe and sound. Samaya, embarrassed, replies that she's not worried about him at all. Diana says she's worried too, since she got him into her problems. Samaya says she is more worried about Diana. She doesn't really understand people, but she knows that family is something complicated, and it's very important to Diana. Eizo redesigns the sword again, but it's different again. He doesn't understand why this is happening, and he's sinning a different environment. He doesn't need the sword to be unique. Camillo asks him why he bothers. Camillo thinks his sword is already perfect and sharp enough. He also says it's very much like a high-end model. Eizo shows his knife that was able to cut through a wooden board and realizes that his sword isn't what he wanted to make after all. Eizo says that he usually comes out with very sharp products. Camillo suddenly realizes why he doesn't take regular orders. After all, such things shouldn't fall into the hands of an amateur. Eizo says he needs to try again. Camillo asks to pick up the sword that Eizo had already forged. Eizo says he can pick it up at a discount. Eizo made 2 more knives at the level of the custom model, but they too are inferior to the high-end models. Eizo has no way of knowing why the items are different. The items he made at his place shine brighter, as if they were glowing. He suddenly realizes that when he doesn't put his heart into it, the light of the item isn't as bright. But how could he achieve the same light with the materials he had? Eizo decides to split the knife into pieces, wrap those pieces in a thin, damp linen cloth, and cover it with straw ash. Eizo then melts it over a fire and smokes a single ingot after it cools. He realized that if he didn't have the materials, he could just use his knife. By blending everything into a single ingot, he'll be able to make it work. You have to heat it, notch it, put it back together, hit it with a hammer, and heat it again. Eizo repeated these steps 15 times, and the real work began. Using his power, he sharpened his senses to the limit to deliver precise blows and hammer out the shape of the sword. No longer did Eizo feel the same as the first strike. The sword was ready, but in order to make it into a relic, he needed to use a chisel to put a pattern on it. According to Marius, that sword was the badge of honor of the founder of the Eimer family. That sword was very important to their family. Eizo thought that the founder would not want that sword to be called a fake, as it was not an easy sword to make, and Eizo thought he had no right to ruin it. So he was determined to make a new sword that would be as good as the old one. While working, Eizo didn't even notice that night had fallen. So that the status of the Eimer family heirloom would not be undermined, he completed the sword and fully decorated it. Eizo also placed his emblem in an inconspicuous place and decided to call it a day. The next day he finished the scabbard and the sword was ready. The sword was finally finished. Marius praised it, saying that the sword is truly beautiful. Eizo also mentioned that it took him an entire evening to finish the scabbard. Marius decided to test the sword by swinging it. Eizo asks how he likes the sword. Marius replies that it is the best sword he has ever held in his hands. Eizo says that his swords are always the best. There's no way they're inferior to others. Marius doesn't even have the heart to call this sword a fake. Marius praised Eizo from the bottom of his heart and told him to rest. He will pick him up tomorrow, so Eizo will be back home tomorrow. But until Eizo is allowed to return, he sits at the same table with Marius, Menzel, and Karel. Eizo woke up in the morning ready to leave, but suddenly Marius and his maids came in and changed Eizo into a suit, and then he took him around. Marquis Menzel heard that Lord Karel had recovered the stolen family sword. Marquis Menzel was a close friend of the previous Earl of Eymore. Karel states that he found the sword yesterday near the border. Marquis Menzel says that since the matter is settled, Marius should inherit the title of Count. Karel replies that a man who has had a family heirloom stolen has no right to bear the title of Count. Menzel agrees, but Marius intervenes and says that the sword found by Karel was a fake. Marius pulls out and shows the real sword. Karel flares up with rage. Menzel asks for an explanation. From the documents that Marius' father left behind, it appears that the Eimer family often used spare swords for ceremonial and many other purposes. And it turns out that the real sword is a completely different sword, and the title will be inherited by whoever brings the real one, as the document says. The handwriting on the document does look like Marius' father's, because Camillo did it. Marius says that Karel had already left by the time the document was found. Menzel asks Karel if he has any objections, and if not, no problem. Menzel wants to report this to His Majesty. There is no way Karel can believe that this sword is a fake. Marius suggests that he have it tested. Marius asks the Marquis of Menzel to come out to the courtyard for inspection, and he agrees. The inspection is successful, and there is not a scratch on the sword presented by His Majesty. Its incomparable beauty and durability. The Marquis offers to test another sword with his spear in the same way, and Marius replies that it is not necessary. He strikes the sword with his own, and it splits in two. Marius says that the beauty of this sword is incomparable, and there is no doubt that he is holding a real sword. Menzel says that without a doubt this sword would inspire fear in his opponents on the battlefield. Menzel says that there should be no problem with inheriting the title, as both sides are in agreement on the decision. He plans to inform His Majesty. Karel turns around and pounces on his brother Marius with all his might. Marius reacts in time and kills Karel in a flurry of blows. Marius apologizes for dirtying Menzel's garden. The latter only replies that Marius did the right thing by killing the cheat and thief. He also calls him Count Marius, which means he has already accepted his status. Menzel suggests going back inside now that it's all over. Eizo thinks bitter thoughts in his head as the blow is struck. Thus, Marius inherited the title of Count. Because of Karel's act, his name was blackened. After receiving the title, Marius discussed further actions with Lord Menzel. Karel's death and his deeds were decided not to be publicized. It was also necessary to take measures to ensure that no one would be suspicious of his absence. The Eimer family would secretly take the corpse and bury it in the cemetery. Eizo walks around in his new suit and flirts with the maids, saying he looks damn good in his new clothes. Marius and Camillo thank Eizo profusely for his work. Marius says that due to circumstances he can't properly reward Camillo, but he would still like to repay him in some way. Camillo says that he would be happy if they just keep doing business together. Next, Eizo is asked what he would want as a reward. Eizo replies that he would like to have information about rare ores. Marius replies that he doesn't necessarily have to have the ore, you just have to tell Camillo about it and he'll get it. Also, Marius hands Eizo some money and tells him to take it without too many questions. Eizo eventually leaves Eimer Manor and returns to the Black Forest to pick up Diana and bring her to the celebration of the new Count of Eimer. Eizo is on his way to the house. At the entrance, he sees Reich, Samia, and Diana standing there, greeting him happily. The girls are happy to see him again. They congratulate him on his return. Eizo tells the whole story to Diana, and she is very sad about it. Diana tells that Karel used to be very kind to everyone. They used to play together a lot when they were kids. He was on good terms with his father, with his brother Ryan, and of course with Marius. Diana cried, asking why it had to end like this. Eizo says he forged a new sword for the Eimer family, and that sword took her brother's life. Diana apologizes for crying. Eizo tells her not to worry, because he couldn't get along with a man who acts calm when he's told his own brother is dead. No matter who a person is before death, we are all equal after death. Eizo says that his death will be kept top secret, so if she needs to cry, she needs to cry now. Eizo says he's taking Diana to the estate in the morning, and he has to be at the celebration too. Then the two of them will go away again for a few days. Reich says she has no problem waiting, but Samaya might start to worry. Samaya is embarrassed. The next day, Eizo and Diana arrive at Eimer Manor. Diana finally arrives and is able to see her brother Marius. This time Eizo decided to take a proper look around the town. There are many different inhabitants there. There are beastmen and dwarves. It is also said that the large gate at the exit of the city says that the kings of the past made a pact with the giants. Camillo is also told that there are also elves who come out to trade in the city, though rarely, sometimes. It turns out that tomorrow there will be an audience with the king and the celebration itself as well. Marius looks very tired. Eizo thinks that he has nothing to do until tomorrow, but then Diana calls him to the guard. Diana decides to challenge Eizo to a sword fight again. Eizo agrees and says it will be the last lesson for her. Diana asks Eizo to fight her seriously at least one last time, and Eizo agrees. Eizo attacks and slices off several strands of Diana's hair with his sword. Diana says she didn't even see his attack. Eizo replies that she is getting stronger day by day. If she keeps practicing, she will reach unexpected heights. The next day, Marius tells the king everything, and after celebrating, he is officially made count. The hastily prepared celebration went brilliantly. Eizo also thought of cooking a couple of local dishes at home, and Rika and Samia would love them. Diana appears in front of Eizo in a beautiful dress. He praises her dress and says that it makes her look like a beautiful rose. Diana tells him to stop embarrassing her, and Eizo wishes he could see her like this again. That's when the other men appear from behind Eizo. Each of them asks permission to escort her. Eizo no longer had a chance to continue his conversation with Diana for the rest of the celebration. It was already time for Eizo to leave. Eizo speaks his parting words to Marius, and the latter replies that he put the fake sword in his wagon so that Eizo could repair it in his spare time. Due to circumstances, they can't keep this sword with them, so Eizo will have to take care of it. Marius says there's something else he'd like to leave with Eizo. He loads it onto the wagon. Camillo gives Eizo a ride home and tells him not to forget the luggage. Eizo walks over to the box and opens it to see what's in it. Upon opening it, he suddenly sees Diana, who has been sitting in the box all this time. It was indeed Diana. Eizo asks Diana what she left here. Diana hands him a letter from her brother, telling him that since he's reading it, their plan definitely worked. The letter also says that having lost two brothers, he and Diana are the only ones left in the family, so the circumstances around Diana have changed a lot. Marius would like Eizo to take her in, otherwise she can't escape the bad things that might happen to her in the future. Marius also wrote that if Diana is okay with it, Eizo can do whatever he wants with her. Eizo says that since she's here, there's nothing more to do, and together they leave for the house. Diana, embarrassed, says that she will probably only be in their way. Eizo replies that if she was really in the way, he would have sent her home right away. Diana calls him Mr. Eizo, to which he replies that she can just address him by his first name. Eizo says that family members are not addressed by Mr., and Diana calls him by his first name. Reich and Samaya happily greet Diana and Eizo. Reich tells Diana that their plan worked, and Eizo looks at them perplexed. Reich says it's their little girly secret. Eizo's forge has accepted Diana into their family. The family has gotten bigger, which means it's time to expand. They spent over a week on the expansion. Finally, the room for Diana was ready. Eizo told her to try it out today. Eizo also hands Diana a knife he made himself. Each of his family members has their own knife. Samaya says it's their family tradition. Diana thanks him for the gift, and Eizo offers to move all of Diana's things into her new room. They needed to go into town the next day to buy Diana bedding. The guys arrive at Camillo's store, where he says that thanks to them, his store has added both people and work. Camillo says that business expansion is always a good thing. He also mentions that the rare Apoidocara, or that Eizo was interested in, will soon be in town. Apoidocara is a very rare metal, and Camillo offers to hold on to it for Eizo. While Eizo was in the capital, he left the work at the forge for the girls, and thanks to them they now have goods to sell. And about the ore, he wanted to ask Marius himself again. Eizo thinks about how the capital is a very large city. He realizes that he intends to live as a blacksmith in this world. He doesn't need anything else in this life. He also ponders that if he were with a different ability, would he have been able to put his life together as successfully? Samaya asks him if Eizo really wants to travel, and he replies that he was born for something else in this world and he's had enough adventures on his head. Samaya abruptly leaves, and Reich says that every time Eizo leaves them, she fears that he will never come back, and Samaya is also very worried about that. Eizo says that this time in his life will be different, and he is not going to leave his family. Samaya smells the rain and says that from the looks of it, it's going to rain for a long time, about a week. Eizo said that even if it rains a long time, the water should go and get some tomorrow. Just like Samaya said, the rain was very long and Eizo couldn't even go hunting. To avoid sitting idle, they all sat together and made sheets of metal. Diana marveled at how strong they all were, that they were making sheets of metal by themselves. Samaya said that they are all jocks here because they are beast men. Even though Eizo is a normal human, he is stronger than all of them. The next day it was still raining, so Eizo asked everyone to get busy making basic models while he started making his new knife that he used in the capital. Reich stared at Eizo and said that when he works seriously, he makes works of art. Diana, on the other hand, said that he was just very handsome. All the girls praised it, saying they think it's a masterpiece. Eizo says that he couldn't forge such a beautiful knife in the city, so he used his old knife to forge the sword, otherwise it wouldn't have worked. Eizo says that when he works in his home, he is more relaxed and can forge anything. He's also very happy that he hasn't lost his skills. It continued to rain for a few more days, and they forged new pieces. It seemed to them that it would rain forever. And then, finally, the rain stopped. The girls decided to go hunting on this occasion. Diana says that Samaya is very happy that Eizo is living these days with them. Reich says that Eizo doesn't understand Samaya's girlish heart. Reich and Eizo work together in the blacksmith shop, and he thinks the hammer blows are like music. Eizo and Reich sit down to eat lunch, and Eizo asks her if she wants to go for a walk with the girls, as she sits in the forge all day and doesn't see the light of day. Reich thought about it, but said that they, the dwarves, are happy with this life. And besides, she is with the master and is learning a lot from him, so she is very happy about it. They are thinking of finishing, but suddenly they hear a fierce knock on the door. Eizo goes to open the door, already recognizing the person by their voice. It was Helen who came in. They were clearly happy to see each other again. Helen said she had a long hike ahead of her, so she decided to stop by Eizo's house for a diagnostic to fix bugs if she finds anything. Eizo asks her how often she has used the sword. Helen replies that it's been a week uninterrupted since she started training. After that, she had a run-in with bandits nearby. Eizo says that there is almost no damage on the blade, only minor damage. It's hard enough to do any damage to this sword, so Eizo is left wondering how much force she swings it with. Helen says that this sword is perfect for her, as it has saved her life many times. Helen says that no thanks for that sword is enough, but she thanks him nonetheless. Eizo replies that it was his work, and they shake hands. Eizo says that the sword will last her a long time in this condition, but he will still touch it up. Helen also asks Eizo to watch him work on it, and Eizo agrees. Reich and Helen watch Eizo's work closely. He sees that there are almost no problems on the sword. He will only fix minor scratches and other damage. Eizo has finished his work, and Helen says that the sword is just like new. Eizo is very surprised that she was able to feel the difference at all. Eizo starts on his next order, and the girls watch him work again. Helen says she likes watching him because it makes her feel like a craftsman. Helen says she often saw her father working when he was a saddler. For some reason, she had to leave home, but she still really enjoyed watching her father work. Helen wonders why Eizo doesn't ask her why she left home, and he replies that prying into a woman's past is rude. Eizo is just finishing his order by the time Samaya and Diana come in from hunting. They all say hello to Helen. Diana is very happy to see Helen, as she has heard great things about her. Eizo tells Helen that instead of paying her to fix things, she can practice with Diana, as she certainly won't mind. Helen calls Diana to come with her. Diana tells her to hold back when fighting. Eizo is doing other things at the forge in the meantime. Eizo is just finishing up his business when the outcome of Helen and Diana's battle is revealed. Helen says that Diana is smashed to pieces. Eizo asks Helen how his apprentice is doing. Helen says that Diana has a good base, but a lot of unnecessary moves. She needs more time and practice, and then she will definitely do well. A lesser grade was not to be expected from a martial artist. Helen also said that for someone from the palace, Diana is very strong, perhaps the strongest of them all. Helen asks if Eizo is coaching Diana by any chance, because she noticed Eizo's habits from her one fight with him. Diana asks if it's true that Eizo lasted 15 minutes in his battle with Helen. Eizo replies that it's true. Helen was his first opponent with paired weapons. Diana says that he's impressing her more and more. Helen offers Eizo to fight again, but he refuses and says that it is very late. He also offers Helen to spend the night at their place, reasoning that it could be very dangerous even for Helen to go through the forest. Eizo will go to town tomorrow to get goods so he can see her off. Helen accepts this invitation. Eizo arrives in town with the girls, where they are searched at the entrance. They say goodbye to Helen and split up, heading to Camel's store. Eizo shows him his new item, a halberd. Eizo wants him to sell it to the count, as it will be perfect for the guards of the city. Camel says he doesn't have the apothecary ore yet, but he does have another ore, mithril. Camel wants Eizo to forge a rapier out of it. Eizo agrees on the condition that he puts his seal in an inconspicuous place. He is excited to finally work with something other than steel. Eizo says that today they are conquering a new, or Myfrill. Reich says she's never seen or like this. She's excited to learn something new today. Diana and Samaya ask Eizo for permission to watch him work. Eizo explains that the principle of working with Myfrill is very different from working with iron. It needs to be forged at a temperature just below steel processing. Mithril is hard to work with, even with Eizo's improved hammer. A normal blacksmith could not handle such ore, as Eizo says. Eizo says that he has never encountered such or since he came to this world, but he has the cheater ability and everything he needs. With his eyes, Eizo can see the structure of the metal. Mithril doesn't have irregularities like steel, so he can immediately focus on lengthening it. He will conquer this or width of their power. Girls pay attention to the fact that the sound of forging is very similar to music. The girls have been watching Eizo since lunch, and they're still not tired. Eizo asks Reich to prepare the sharpening stone, skipping the hardening stage since this material is already very strong. The materials in the other world are on a whole other level. Eizo's senses tell him that if he lets his guard down even a little, the entire workpiece will be ruined. Eizo mustn't relax until the end. So, the blade is now ready, and it can be tried out. This is still a bare blade. He'll put the handle and the rest in later. Diana takes the blade and says it's very light. They don't call this material bird feather for nothing. Diana says she will try it out outside. Diana waves the blade. Samaya talks about how Diana's gaze has been scaring her lately. She's watching her strangely somehow, and Samaya can feel it. Reich, on the other hand, didn't feel the same way. Diana walks in on them and asks what's going on here. Sammy is told to ask her directly. Screenshot 314. Diana explains the situation and apologizes, saying that Samaya is just very nice to her. Screenshot 315. Diana longed to pet her fluffy ears and tail, her fur and paws. But she was very afraid to touch a stranger without permission, so she looked at her so strangely. Diana handles her new sword with ease. Diana's movements are very similar to Marius. Meanwhile, Eizo ponders the purpose of the sword, believing that the weapon only does damage, regardless of its size. Diana recognizes that she spends less energy wielding her new sword. To test her weapon, Samaya and Reich suggest that Diana destroy a log. Diana easily makes a hole in the log, shocking those around her. Diana admits that she didn't notice she had made the hole, to which Eizo replies that the girl has gotten stronger. Eizo notices that the blade didn't deform from the impact. Reich suggests continuing the test and chopping the ingot of metal. Diana breaks through the ingot of metal with no problem. Reich notices that her blade is damaged. Eizo thinks that this blade can both help people and lick lives. Eizo notes that Diana's sword is something Eizo wasn't capable of before. Looking at the blade, Eizo remembers his experience with blacksmithing. Eizo realizes that such a powerful weapon should not end up in the wrong hands, since this sword is not only sharp, but also does not warp. Eizo recognizes that his gift cannot be used negligently, as his weapon can affect the fate of the world. Eizo is confused, as he will now have to decide who gets such a sword. Noticing the hero's mood, Samaya inquires about his well-being. Eizo calls out to Diana, Reich and Samaya. They cheerfully call out. Eizo asks if he should sell that sword. The hero doesn't want the weapon to end up in the wrong person's possession, as he realizes its power. Eizo admits that he doesn't know if he can bear the consequences of his actions. In his heart, the hero chastises himself for his weakness and for having to take his problems out on others. Eizo thinks that girls will be disappointed in him because he has shown a weak side. However, the girls only smile. Diana cheerfully points out that Eizo is just as human as the rest of them and that it's totally normal to think about the consequences of selling the sword. Reich notes that any creator feels responsible for their wares. Diana encourages the hero by saying that no one can know who gets the weapon, good or bad person. Samaya smilingly asks Eizo to share his thoughts with the girls as they are one family. Eizo drops a tear out of emotion and lowers his head to thank the girls. The girls only smile sweetly and understandingly. The three girls hug the hero. Eizo comes to his senses and notes that he feels better. In his mind, he realizes that he has the role of a creator and that this is his job. Eizo mentally accepts the idea that he will create great weapons for his customers regardless of their status. Samaya notes that the hero is smiling again, to which Eizo asks if he looks cooler. An awkward moment ensues. Everyone smiles, and Eizo mentions in his mind that he is capable of anything around his loved ones. The next day, Eizo decides to make backgammon and help them steal, since it's harder to work with mithril. Eizo finishes the rapier, after which the weapon is sent to Camillo's store. At the same time, he receives a commission from the Count to restore the halberd. According to Camillo, there are no wars or conquests to worry about. The only thing is that there are occasional skirmishes with monsters in the borderlands and disputes over water between humans. The family is traveling back on a cart pushed by Eizo. Diana keeps looking around, and Eizo notices this. Samaya replies that Diana is looking out for a wolf cub they once stumbled upon. Samaya says that she and Diana once encountered a she-wolf with cubs. Eizo replies that the wolves here can be easily tamed. The family returns home, but there is a knock at the door. Eizo opens the door and sees an elven woman with a bundle in her hands. The elf asks if he is Eizo's blacksmith. Eizo answers in the affirmative, whereupon the elfess asks for a favor. Eizo invites her into the house. The elfess is treated to wine and water, after which she opens the bundle and inside is a sword. The elven woman asks for her mithril sword to be repaired. Eizo notices the rather thin blade. The elven woman asks to repair the blade completely. Eizo asks if she came alone, to which the elfess admits that she used concealment magic. Eizo replies that there's nothing to it, so he also takes the elfess order. Upon hearing this, the elfess rejoices greatly. Eizo asks about the time frame, and the elf asks for the blade to be restored as soon as possible. They end up agreeing on a deadline of 2 weeks. Samia and Diana return home with their loot. When they see the elven woman, they are very surprised. The elven woman introduces herself as Liddy. Diana greets her politely by lifting the hem of her dress, much to Samaya's surprise. A confused Samaya also introduces herself to Liddy. Reich also introduces herself to the guest. The elf asks Eizo to watch her work, as it is very important to her. Eizo doesn't mind and allows Liddy to watch him work. Liddy also asks for a corner in the garden, which shocks the hero because there are animals outside. However, the elven woman assures him that the monsters will be good for her, as he should beware of magic in this place. The elven woman explains that because of the high concentration of magic, no trees grow near the hero's house, and animals don't come close. Eizo himself knows nothing about this. The elven woman is surprised by the hero's ignorance, as she thought that Eizo knows how to deal with local magic. The hero quickly discounts everything on intuition to avoid revealing his cheating abilities. In his mind, he thinks that he couldn't create a magic sword in the city because the capital city has weak magic power. Eizo asks the elf girl to make herself comfortable in the guest room, to which the girl is embarrassed to interject, since up until this point she thought Diana, Reich and Samaya were the hero's wives. Something like this greatly confuses all the characters. Eizo quickly replies that the girls are his family. The elf girl quickly apologizes for her words. The characters are about to cook dinner of the wild falcon that Samia brought. Eizo asks Diana and Reich to prepare the guest room and Samia to help him with cutting the meat. Suddenly, the hero remembers that elves don't eat meat. An elven woman volunteers to help Eizo and Samaya. Samaya is surprised by this, as she thought elves were vegetarian. Liddy explains that it's a stereotype, and came about because it's easier to get fruits and vegetables than meat. In his thoughts, Eizo realizes with annoyance that even in this world there are stereotypes. The elven woman tells him that the settlements of her people often hunt deer and birds, and their main diet is potatoes. After a time, the heroes begin repairing Liddy's sword. They start by putting it apart like a jigsaw puzzle. Eizo decides to work with mithril, because with steel you can ruin the material even more. In his mind, the hero recognizes that the hardest part is putting the sword together. And so their work begins. Eizo is warming the blade over the coals, at which time Liddy approaches him. Eizo says that he uses simple magic in his work, such as wind or kindling flames. The Elfess is surprised by this and explains that such machinations require experience. Therefore, the hero's ignorance of local magic confuses the girl. Liddy smiles during her story. Eizo notes in his thoughts that he is a bit intimidated by Liddy's smile. He realizes that he just got his gift that way. While girls can't use magic, Eizo and Reich are working together. While Reich holds the weapon, the hero tries to stick the pieces together. The hero works Vreknea without using a special tool to better control the temperature. Eizo goes beyond the allowed temperature in his work. He notes that it's possible to break the blade at this rate. Upon hearing this, the elf woman warily asks if Eizo will be able to repair her weapon. Watching Eizo at work, Liddy notes that the hero is able to see magical flows. Eizo admits that he is trying to hold on to some particles while working. When Liddy hears this, she confirms the hero's words very loudly and gets too close to him, causing Eizo to blush. The hero looks into the metal and realizes that the light he saw is the magical power. Examining the blade, Eizo realizes that the parts are well bonded, but there are tears in the joints. The hero realizes that despite the perfect bonding of the parts of the blade, it will not be possible to use its magic power. Eizo shows Liddy the blade, and the girl notices the joints on the weapon. Eizo shows the joints to Rika as well, but the girl doesn't notice them. Standing off to the side are an uncomprehending Liana and Samaya. Eizo explains that restoring the mold is not enough. Eizo gives the girl a choice. Either he strikes the joints and restores the flow of magic, or he leaves only the form. Hearing this, the girl thinks hard. The girl will forgive restoring the blade with magic. After all, the most important thing is that she can use it. Eizo takes the order with a smile. Eizo slaps himself in the face to pull himself together, as he really doesn't want to let Liddy down. The hero decides to make a wooden mold to recreate the shape of the sword afterward. Eizo and Reich begin their work. They put the sword in the furnace. Afterward, they start forging, all in order to form the shape from the plates of Myfrill. The work continues the next day. Diana and Samaya go to pick fruit, while the hero goes to forge the weapon. In the process, he notices that the blade has become heavier, showing it to Liddy as he believes it has added magical power. Liddy confirms that the sword has gotten heavier and cheerfully notes that Eizo is great with magic power. Eizo catches himself thinking that since thin swords didn't get heavier because of magic, the hero discounts everything on the purity of the metal. Clutching the hammer in his hands, Eizo recognizes in his mind that with each blow he needs to put more and more effort into his work, which makes it much harder. Samaya returns home and tells Eizo that she tore his bag and the contents are now lying around. Eizo agrees to help pack it up, asking Rika to clean up the workshop on her own. Samia and Eizo are walking through the forest and see Diana, who turns to them and gestures for them to be quiet. The heroes cautiously approach Diana. Samaya pulls some dried meat out of a pouch and throws it on the ground. Two puppies come out to the meat and sniff the treat. Upon seeing the puppies, Diana covers her mouth with her fingers in mortification. Diana, Eizo, and Samaya watch the puppies frolic cutely. One of them collides with Diana's eyes, causing the girl to become quite mortified. Diana can't hold back her emotions, causing her to slap Eizo on the shoulder. Samaya smilingly notes that the hero's arm will be sore. The trio returns home. Eizo sees that Reich and Liddy were talking about something before they arrived. Reich admits that the Elfess was explaining to her how to catch the flow of magic, but Reich never understood anything. Liddy explains that it is much easier for the bustards to understand magical power if they listen to the ore they are working with. Liddy offers to help teach Rika. Eizo gladly agrees to this, as he realizes that with this knowledge, Reich will be able to bed unique weapons. At night, Eizo sits down and peels tree limbs from their skin, humming to himself. By morning, Eizo is finishing up the Shinto altar he crafted to make himself feel calmer. Eizo wonders in his mind how the gods of the current world would react to such a thing. The four girls leave the house to wash up. Samaya peeks over to Eizo and sees the one half bowed in front of the altar. The other girls are also watching Eizo with curiosity. Reich comes closer and asks what the hero does. Eizo replies that he worships the gods from his northern homeland in this way. Diana, pointing to the altar, asks, "Should this little house be worshipped?" Eizo explains that in the north they believe that even small houses are inhabited by spirits. An enthusiastic Samaya asks if she and the girls can try praying too. The interested elven girl is just as okay with that. Eizo gives permission with a smile. The whole family folds their hands in a prayer gesture in front of the altar. In his thoughts, Eizo expresses his confusion about the presence of God in his new world and hopes that one of the Bitgaw will still appear. After finishing his prayer, Eizo invites his family over for breakfast. Eizo hopes that the god in the small altar will help him with his work and with hunting his family. Eizo ponders what he wishes for from the god: satiety in his home or for his family to always smile. Eizo continues his work and divides up his duties. Reich is to help him with the blade. Samaya and Diana are to take care of the wood for the hilt. Eizo plans to continue working with the mithril for a few more days. Eizo realizes that working with such metal requires a great deal of concentration, so as not to overdo the force of the blow and ruin the work. Eizo strikes the metal with his hammer, and at the same time realizes that the work could be much easier if he knew magic. While working, Eizo notes that the sound of hammering is pleasant to the ears. During a break, Eizo asks if Liddy enjoys watching him work, to which the girl replies that the hero has an interesting job, unlike other blacksmiths. Liddy also says that for long-lived elves time flies fast enough. The other girls are very surprised by this statement. Liddy admits that she also likes the sound of Eizo's work, and that there is no blacksmith in the elf village who makes the same sound. Eizo is surprised by this and he asks, as he did not know that other blacksmiths and he get different sounds. The elven woman replies that the pleasant sound of mithril is produced by the skillful use of magic. This statement delights Reich, who is wiping herself with sweat. Liddy claps her hands and solemnly declares that the better the smith is at magic, the nicer the sound of the metal. Such a statement motivates Eizo to work, as he realizes that he is able to put magic into the marrow, which means that his time is not wasted. Also, the hero is afraid of standing too arrogant from his abilities. To take a break from work, Eizo decides to take a day off for all the workers at the forge, and the heroes go fishing. The next day, arrested Eizo fills 2 huge jugs with water from the river. Lifting the jugs on his shoulders, he heads back, but something catches his eye. He sees Liddy standing peacefully near a tree, whose hair and clothes are ruffled by the wind. Eizo greets Liddy and warns her that it can be dangerous in this forest because of the beasts and monsters. The girl assures her that the high concentration of magical power in this place will prevent monsters from approaching the forest. The girl says that if any monsters appear, it will surely be because of the cave where the magic has been infused. After hearing this, Eizo assumes that it is because of this cave that the bear that attacked Samia was so aggressive. Eizo asks the girl what she was doing in this lichu alone. This question confuses the elf a bit, and the hero quickly adds that she doesn't have to answer. After a lull, the elven girl says she was gathering magical power. Liddy explains that elves need magic power in addition to food. Hearing this, Eizo suggests in his mind that this is why there are few elves. Eizo takes the jugs and says goodbye to the girl, but she calls him back. The girl asks Eizo if he will ask her anything else, to which the hero replies that he has heard everything he needed to hear. Afterwards, Eizo goes into the house, and Liddy stands alone smiling sweetly. Eizo walks into the workshop and warns Rika that there is a lot of work waiting for them today. The girl responds to Eizo with a wide smile. Eizo was able to get the merrill to the right size and give the sword its original look with a wooden mold. While working on the sword, Eizo asks Liddy how such a sword broke. The girl hesitates to answer, and the hero convinces him that he is only interested in their curiosity. The girl replies that there is magic in it, so she can't answer in detail. She also explains that in order to wield such a sword, one must infuse it with magical power. This sword was highly valued by me in the elven village, until something happened to it. The girl replies that they overdid the magic power, causing the sword to break. After hearing the answer, Eizo continues his work. With about 2 weeks left until the deadline, Eizo works tirelessly, and lo and behold, Eizo holds the finished sword in his hands, while the girls look on with delight at the work done. The hero holds out the sword to Liddy, asking her to appreciate his work. The girl is scrutinizing the weapon while the rest of the daughters wait patiently for her verdict. The elfa smiles contentedly and reports that the work is even better than she imagined. Upon hearing this, the girls shout enthusiastically and triumphantly. Hearing the answer, Eizo is overcome with anxiety that he has overdone the work. But the girl assures him that this sword will now hold more magical power and thanks the hero once again. The matter comes to payment, and the elf girl clarifies whether Eizo is sure to be satisfied with the set price. The confused girl gives Eizo 5 gold coins and some wood, saying that this is all she has for now. Eizo places another coin in the girl's hands and asks her to bring him vegetable seeds from her village to give to the camel in town. The girl says she has too many coins for such a request, and Eizo replies that it's also Rika's tuition. The elf bows and thanks the hero for his kind words. The family sees Liddy off, and she ektrashed boagarates them, noting that the cusp was quite interesting. With a wide smile, Liddy says she had a lot of fun. The family smiles similarly at her, and the girls say goodbye to their new friend. Diana asks to spend next time teaching her elven swordsmanship and Rika to give her a couple lessons in magic. An elven girl asks if she can come to the house for more than just an order, and she is answered in the affirmative. With a wide smile, Eizo asks her to tell everyone what a good bushwhacker's shop this place is. After the elven woman leaves, Eizo has returned to a measured life. At Camille's shop, Camillo states that Eizo is having no problems as usual. Eizo says that there are rumors of thieves in town and asks Camille if he knows anything about it. Camille replies that no property goes missing and the swillers stay alive, and the victims don't remember the voices or the thief's appearance. Eizo says that Diana suspected Corel of the attack, but immediately dismissed the idea, as Corel would have gotten there much sooner. Eizo and Camilla agree with her completely. Eizo says that his family's house has not been damaged yet, but they need to be careful. Camilla abruptly remembers that he got a lick of something and asks Eizo to take a look. Eizo and the girls go together to see the interesting animal. They look at the cute pony-sized monster that looks like a dinosaur with wonder and delight. Camille explains that in front of them is a running dragon. Eizo notes that the animal is quite cute. At the sight of the dragon, Diana blushes profusely and slaps Eizo on the arm out of embarrassment. The hero notes that the animal definitely liked the girl. Eizo asks what to feed the dragon, and Camilla replies that the animal is an omnivore. Camille also notes that the dragon eats quite little. Eizo wonders why he doesn't keep it. Camille says that the dragon will stand out in his stable. Eizo decides to take the animal, but is warned that it is not cheap. Eizo states that he will pay next time, as he doesn't have any money on hand right now. Camilla agrees to this and goes off to get a bridle for the dragon. An enthusiastic Diana asks permission to pet the animal, to which Eizo replies in the affirmative, as it is their newest family member. Diana touches the dragon's long neck and declares that the animal's body is warm. The dragon allows the girl to take it by the head. The dragon makes a coo-roo-roo sound, which leaves Diana shocked. The other girls join in as well, and together they pet their new friend. The family rides on a cart paired with a dragon. Reich notes that the dragon understands perfectly how to pull the cart. Eizo says that the dragon will need to be ported upon return. The cart bumps into a rock, causing it to lift slightly, almost throwing the people on it off. Eizo smilingly states that the dragon is accelerating too fast. Samaya asks what they will do if the cart has to carry something heavier than the current passengers. Eizo says they'll have to work on the payload capacity. The family pulls into the forest. Eizo says they made it twice as fast as they did on foot. The dragon feels calmer in the forest, but the cart once again bumps into a tree root pripyasit, causing it to rise sharply. The passengers fall inside the cart, and Reich apologizes for the cart accidentally hitting the branch. In Eizo's mind, he realizes that the cart will need to be improved soon. The family finally arrives home and begins unloading various bags from the cart. Eizo gives the dragon a bucket of water and thanks him for the ride. Eizo removes the bridle and wipes the animal's back with a cloth while it nibbles on grass. Diana brings the meat on a tray and asks what their pet's name will be now. Reich gets close to the dragon and touches its nose, asking what gender it is. Samaya says it's hard to tell by eye. Diana recalls that one of the aristocrats named his horse, Henning Herman. Eizo notes with a smile that such a name is impossible to memorize. Diana asks Eizo if he has any ideas, To which the hero replies that in such matters it is better not to give him freedom of choice, so that he won't be disappointed afterwards. Samaya suggests naming the dragon Urchik, since he keeps rumbling. Diana and Reich agree to the idea. Eizo agrees, as the name is easy enough to remember. Diana hugs the pet and congratulates him on his new name. Urchik rumbles from the girl's caresses. Eizo says he'll make a new home for Urchik tomorrow, suggesting that everyone get some rest today. After stretching, Eizo goes to get water, but stops to look at the dragon. The dragon lies quietly on the grass and watches the hero with interest. Eizo greets Urchik and suggests that they go together to fetch water. The animal makes a "uru" sound, which makes Eizo surprised. Eizo equips the animal with a bucket around his neck, causing Urchik to smile. Taking his buckets, Eizo goes to fetch water. Eizo standing with Urchik near the river, noting that the dragon needs to walk more and warm up. All day the family worked on making a cabin for Urchik. The family was very lucky that the PX had a lot of wood piled up that they used to make the house. Urchik is helping the family to transport the wood, but Diana is too worried about him, always asking if he is having a hard time. Together the work goes very fast, and after 2 days the dominoes are finally finished. Urchik enters his new home, where it will be very convenient to hide from the rain and sun. The dragon lovingly lies down on the hay, and this is what pleases Diana, who starts petting the animal. Reich notes that Urchik is quite intelligent and understands his owners perfectly. Eizo remarks that he is very happy that they all finished the Nagelrmiakum together. Samaya says that the hero worked the hardest, and Reich falls out admiring that the man knows so much. These words surprise Eizo. In his thoughts, Eizo realizes that he still has knowledge from the past world and that he is using techniques that have not yet been invented in his current world. Eizo teaches Urchik how to carry water, and the dragon does a great job. Next on the plan is to improve the wagon. Eizo tells the girls that they need to focus on working on the wagon first, and after that they can get back to their main job. The hero tells Rika that she'll have to help him with the metal, and the girl happily agrees. Leaning over the wooden planks, Eizo thinks about making a suspension so that the wagon won't shake during the trip. Eizo boils water and puts the material in it to make it bendable and then nails the planks together. He then assembles the front and rear wheels and installs the spring on the rear wheels. Eizo finishes his work, and Urchik looks at the new wagon with curiosity. The hero equips the dragon with the new wagon to test its work. Afterward, he makes sure the job is done perfectly. Next, Eizo shapes the cart using a metal frame. Even with the knowledge from the past world, Eizo is pretty exhausted working on the cart. Sitting on the boards, Eizo reflects on the fact that people invented everything from scratch to improve their lives. Eizo uses steel for material, which is as good as the steel he uses for orders. Eizo calls out to Samaya and reminds him about lunch. Outside, sitting on a log, the family is snacking on tortillas. Eizo informs them that he will finish the job in a couple days. He thanks the girls for taking care of the house while he works on the cart. Reich shares her progress and says that she is practicing her magic power control. Samaya says that Reich is making great knives. Hearing this, Reich is embarrassed and braggadocioed for the praise. Eizo inspects Reich's work and takes a closer look at her weapons. He notes that the knives are similar to her simpler work, but it feels like a different level. Eizo says with a smile that Reich did a great job. But the apprentice doesn't accept the praise, and with a blush declares that she has to make the perfect model. Eizo pats the apprentice on the back, saying that she will do well. As soon as the hero leaves the room, he lurks by the door and sees Reich proud of her work. Eizo invites the girls into the new carriage, and they get into it with interest. Eizo takes the leash, and Urchik rides forward. The girls notice that the carriage hardly shakes at all. Eizo explains that this is because of the springs in the carriage. The breeze blows the passengers around pleasantly. Eizo mentally notes that the carriage will make it easy to transport goods and distribute information. Eizo recalls the goddess words that his existence will not change the world much, but he realizes that this is not true. Urchik runs merrily through the forest with Eizo and his family. At Camel's place, Eizo is paying off the dragon. The hero notes that the nobleman sold him the animal for below market price, to which Camille replies that he bought the dragon even cheaper than he sold it. Camille asks how Eizo is doing with the dragon, to which the hero praises the pet's strength and intelligence as it helps around the house. Camille replies that he is very happy to hear such things. Afterward, the nobleman asks with interest how Eizo's new leash works. Eizo replies that the leash makes the wagon not crack as much and offers to make another wagon for Camille. The enthusiastic nobleman interjects Eizo, to which the hero replies that he doesn't even need to pay. Camille can't take such an offer for free and retreats to another room to fetch something for Eizo with which he can repay. Samaya notes that there are too many people in the city. Eizo explains that there are too many bandits in town because Marius is fighting monsters on the border. The family finishes shopping and decides to go home, but someone gets in their way. Someone with a sword asks them to stop and says that if they don't, they will have to use force. Eizo asks Urchik to stop. Eizo whispers, telling the girls to keep their eyes open. Eizo notices that there are no more bandits in the neighborhood. Diana is surprised that the girl with the gun is still at large, and the hero wonders what the girl is trying to accomplish. The bandit girl points her gun at Urchik, and an enraged Diana draws her sword from its sheath. Eizo asks her to stop. The criminal asks her to give her the weapon back. Eizo analyzes the criminal and realizes that she might be a bit stronger than Diana, but they also have Samia with them. The hero is distracted from his thoughts by Reich, who forgives Eizo for throwing his knife at the girl. Eizo throws the knife at Krim's feet, and she gently takes his hands. Upon seeing the weapon, she stirs. Bandit asks where they got the knife from, much to the family's surprise. Samaya can't hold back her laughter, and the enraged bandit asks what's so funny about what she said. The girl interrogates the family, but Eizo replies that he made the knife himself. This sort of thing shocks the criminal. Eizo says that they sold weapons in town, and if the girl is interested in their goods, she should put the weapon down. The criminal girl agrees. Eizo asks the girl to get on the wagon, which leaves her puzzled. Eizo reminds her that she might run into the guards. The girl gets on the wagon and says that she was looking for a weapon with a kitty cat emblem. Eizo replies that it's a dream of his merchandise. Bowing her head, the criminal asks him to make her another weapon. Eizo replies in thought that the girl is not as bad as she seems at first glance. However, the other girls look at her with distrust. Eizo agrees, but makes a condition. The girl must come alone to his forge in the Black Forest. She agrees. The girl says she is a demon and asks if she can definitely come. To which Eizo replies that he doesn't care about races. The demon disappears, with Samaya watching the scene in shock. Eizo recalls that 600 years ago there was a bloody war between demons and humans, and it only ended when the hero defeated the Demon King. However, he himself could not survive his wounds. Both sides were exhausted from the war, because of which a peace agreement was signed. There are rumors that the hero used a two-handed Oriseok sword, which was supposedly forged by a legendary blacksmith named Dondor. Reich in the doorway of the blacksmith shop respectfully tells Eizo that he will surpass Dondor. Back home, Eizo keeps thinking about demons and legends. Eizo asks Diana if the demon is coming tomorrow, and the girl answers in the affirmative. Eizo wonders if it's worth making a weapon for the demon. Diana says that Eizo won't care for a long time since he's still just a blacksmith. Eizo agrees with her, but asks how she would react if such a weapon killed her brother. The girl replies with a smile that Eizo's weapon is already being used by the mercenary Helen, who may well face Marius in a duel. Eizo realizes that Diana has already made the decision to stay in this place. Eizo also realizes that Samia and Reich are also fine with working with the demon. In the kitchen, while peeling potatoes, Eizo wonders if they need to warn Camille and Marius. Diana replies that if Eizo's goal is to help her brother fulfill his duty, it would be appropriate. Eizo doesn't want to bet a weapon to someone who could hurt his friends, so he hesitates to work with the demon. When Eizo returns with the water, he runs into the demon outside his house. The demon throws off his hooded cloak and reveals his face. The demon is a very pretty girl with horns, elf ears, and a black tattoo on her face. The girl asks with a smirk if she's better off without her cloak, to which Eizo indifferently replies in the affirmative, and asks her to stay outside until he takes the water away. The man's response disappoints the girl. Eizo is chopping wood while the demon watches his actions. The hero politely asks if the girl got there without any problems, to which she replies in the negative, saying that strangers are not easy in this particular forest. Eizo interjects without understanding, and the girl is surprised that the man knows nothing about it, even though he lives in a dark forest. Eizo makes the excuse that he doesn't know magic, and the house is his gift. The demon explains that in this place, magic gets in the way of confusing people he considers strangers. Eizo recalls that the elf Liddy told him that not even animals pass near his house. Eizo finishes with the firewood and invites the girl to have breakfast with his family. A surprised demon questions Eizo, to which he replies that the girl is not only their client, but also a guest. The girl is perplexed because she is a demon. Eizo dismisses this by saying that he's a weirdo. He also adds that he doesn't know anything about demons, so he doesn't care what the girl is. Such words make the girl a bit confused. The demon introduces himself as Nilda, and Eizo escorts her to his house. Eizo introduced the guest to her tenants, and while everyone was preparing for breakfast, the girls also showed her their home. Neil also helped her wash her clothes and get dressed. Eizo kneads the dough, noting that his skills have gotten much better, after which he bakes the dough in the oven. Proud of himself, Eizo bakes some tortillas, after which he opens the breakfast pot. At the table, Eizo forgives Neil to elaborate on the order. Nielda tells her that while on patrol between the demon-human border, she encountered a group of human scouts, and that among them was a red-haired girl named Helen. This alarms Eizo. Eizo asks if this girl was called Thunder Sword, and the demon explains that Helen moved so fast that she broke her sword in the blink of an eye. After the fight, Nilda tried to save the sword, but was not in time. After the fight, Helga praised her. Helen explained that if the demoness had a different weapon, she would have been many times stronger. Nilda asked her where to get such blades. Nilda was called out by the other guards, calling her mistress. The demoness was afraid that Helga would massacre her subordinates, but the mercenary showed her the engraving of her sword. Helen told her to find Nilda a master with such engraving and ran away. After this incident, Nilda went in search of Eizo, but only recognized the region where he resides. Eizo asks if Nilda is the reason there are rumors of a mysteriously criminal who doesn't rob or kill. The girl says she used oblivion magic. Finished with their questions, the family continues to eat breakfast. Nilda during breakfast is noted that the food is very tasty. The demoness asks for more and continues, saying that the last time she ate such food was at her sister's house. Eizo is surprised that Nilda has a sister. With a satisfied face, Eizo puts more refills on the demoness plate while Diana looks at him bewildered.